Hey there, tonight we're uncovering what farming was like in ancient Mesopotamia, where the cradle of civilization was both nurtured and challenged by the whims of two mighty rivers, in a world where every sunrise promised both hope and hardship. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. The sun peeks over the horizon, painting the Mesopotamian plains in shades of gold, and you're already up and at it. The air is cool now, but soon it'll morph into the kind of heat that makes you question your life choices. Like why your ancestors decided to settle in a place where summer feels like you're living in a brick oven. But hey, when you have the twin blessings of the Tigris and Euphrates at your disposal, you make it work. Welcome to a day in the life of ancient Mesopotamia, where farming is not just a way of life, it's a necessity that dictates every waking moment. Here's the scoop. You're nestled in the Fertile Crescent, a lush slice of earth cradled by these two rivers. Sounds idyllic, right? In some ways, it is. This area, after all, is the cradle of civilization. But don't get too carried away by dreams of paradise. Farming here isn't for the faint-hearted. Those rivers, they're a double-edged sword. Sure, they bring water, but they also have a tendency to flood unpredictably, turning your well-planned barley fields into a mud bath faster than you can say ziggurat. Speaking of barley, it's your bread and butter, literally. Your main crop, barley, is as central to your existence as Wi-Fi is to ours. To keep those fields lush, you're relying on some pretty sophisticated irrigation techniques. Forget your garden hose. You're dealing with a network of canals, ditches, and levees that would make a modern civil engineer nod in approval. This isn't just some half-baked attempt at watering plants. It's a complex system that requires a keen understanding of hydrodynamics. You need to move water just the right amount, and at just the right time, to avoid both drought and flood. Get it wrong, and you're either knee-deep in mud or watching your crops wither like a bad Tinder date. Now, let's talk numbers. To keep an acre of barley thriving, you're looking at needing several thousand cubic meters of water each growing season. And that's not from a rain dance. You're diverting water from the river through your canals, using gates and channels to control flow. This is where the community comes in, because this isn't a one-man job. From the king down to the lowest peasant, everyone's got a hand in this. It's all hands on deck, or rather, all hands in the mud. The king might be sitting pretty in his palace, but even he knows that without a successful harvest, his throne is just a fancy chair in a starving city. The social structure here is a bit of a pyramid scheme. At the top, you've got the king and the priests, who claim they've got direct lines to the gods, a nifty trick to keep everyone in line. Below them, the scribes and officials keep the wheels turning with tablets and styluses, recording everything from crop yields to taxes. Then there are the craftsmen and merchants, who keep the economy humming, and finally, the farmers and labourers, who are the backbone of it all. You're somewhere in this mix, hauling water, sowing seeds, and praying to every deity in the pantheon for a good harvest. On the topic of deities, Mesopotamian gods are a quirky bunch. There's Enlil, the god of wind and storms, who might decide to throw a tantrum and flood your fields on a whim. Then there's E, the water god, who you're hoping to keep on your good side, because let's face it, irrigation is his domain. If you're lucky, you've got your rituals down pat and can keep them appeased, ensuring the water flows precisely where it should. As you make your way to the fields, the sky is a canvas of potential. You can almost hear the whispers of history, the knowledge passed down through generations encoded in the very soil under your feet. You're not just farming, you're participating in a tradition that has shaped civilizations. You might wonder how many hands have worked this same earth, how many feet have trod these paths, and realize you're part of a story much larger than yourself. But don't get too lost in thought. There's work to be done. You join your fellow farmers, your neighbors, your family, each taking their place in this grand choreography. The irrigation ditches won't clear themselves. You're digging, clearing, maintaining, ensuring that nothing clogs the flow of water. It's back-breaking work, yes, but there's a rhythm to it, a kind of meditation in motion. You're not just working the land, you're understanding it, listening to its needs. As the sun climbs higher, casting sharper shadows, you take a moment to wipe the sweat from your brow. It's a reminder of the relentless heat that defines your days. You wonder what some future archaeologist might make of this moment. Will they look at your irrigation canals and marvel at the ingenuity, or will they just see a bunch of old ditches? Either way, you know that every drop of sweat is an investment in this season's harvest. Not everything is idyllic in this land of ancient wonders, though. The social contract here is unyielding. The king and the temple take their share of the harvest, and it's not a suggestion. Taxes are as old as civilization itself, and you're paying in grain, not gold. You've got quotas to meet, and failure isn't just a hit to your pride. It could mean the difference between feast and famine for your family. Those mythical hanging gardens, they don't plant themselves, and neither does your dinner. As you head back to the village for a midday break, you pass by a scribe jotting down notes on a clay tablet. It's a reminder that while you're up to your elbows in silt, others are busy recording the minutiae of daily life. This is how you're remembered, not in lavish tales or epic poems, but in the dry accounts of bushels of barley and the state of the irrigation ditches. It's not glamorous, but it's real. Over a simple lunch, you sit with your fellow farmers, sharing stories and worries. You talk about the weather, because some things never change, and compare notes on the best ways to keep pests at bay. It's a communal effort, this farming life, bound by shared experience and collective responsibility. The laughter and camaraderie are as essential as the food you eat, breaking the monotony of the day with moments of warmth and connection. As you get back to work, the sun starts its slow descent, casting long shadows across the fields. The evening brings relief from the heat and a sense of accomplishment. You're tired, but it's the kind of tired that feels earned. As you walk back home, you take a moment to look at the fields stretching out before you, knowing that tomorrow brings the same challenges and hopefully the same rewards. In this ancient land, where the past and present mingle under the same vast sky, you find a kind of peace in the rhythm of the seasons. Farming here is not just a means of survival. It's a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. You're part of a lineage that reaches back to the dawn of civilization, and every seed you plant is a promise to the future. As the day ends, you realize that this connection to the earth and to history is what truly sustains you. As you watch the sun dip below the horizon, the promise of another day is in the air, and with it, the relentless rhythm of farming life in ancient Mesopotamia resumes. You're back in the fields, knee-deep in the very soil that's been tilled by countless generations before you. Here's the thing. Farming in Mesopotamia is nothing short of an outdoor gym session, minus the membership fees and plus a ton of grit. And central to this sweat-inducing workout is the array of tools that might not look impressive by our standards, but trust me, they were the iPhones of their day. Let's kick things off with the plow, the MVP of Mesopotamian agriculture. This bad boy was originally just a simple digging stick, but over time it got a glow-up into the scratch plow, or ard. This evolution was like upgrading from a flip phone to a smartphone. The ard was essentially a wooden frame with a pointed tip that scratched the earth, preparing it for sowing. Sure, it wasn't a John Deere, but it got the job done. And when you think about it, its simplicity was its genius. It was light enough to be pulled by oxen, which brings us to the real stars of the show, your friendly neighborhood draft animals. Oxen were to Mesopotamia what Teslas are to Silicon Valley, indispensable, albeit a bit clunkier. These creatures were the muscle behind the plow, turning human innovation into agricultural reality. You'd hitch an ox to your plow, and suddenly you weren't just a farmer. You were orchestrating a symphony of soil. And this wasn't a one-time gig. Ploughing was a biannual ritual, each time marking the start of either the barley or wheat season. Imagine the scene. Fields stretching as far as the eye can see, each furrow a testament to human determination and bovine collaboration. And while we're on the topic of tools, let's not forget the sickle. This little gadget was the ancient equivalent of a Swiss army knife, albeit with a very specific purpose: harvesting. Made from wood, bone, or even flint, if you were feeling fancy, the sickle was designed to cut through stalks of grain with a swift motion. It's not just a tool, it's an art form. The rhythm of harvesting, the swish of the sickle through golden fields, is as mesmeric as it is backbreaking. Now, don't get too starry-eyed. These tools, while revolutionary, didn't exactly make farming a walk in the park. They required skill, strength, and a touch of stubbornness. And here's a fun tidbit. Archaeologists have found sickles with shiny, smooth edges, evidence that they were used so much they got polished by the grain itself. It's a bit like finding a pair of well-worn sneakers. They tell stories of hard work, of countless hours spent under the sun, of a life lived in pursuit of a harvest. Speaking of harvests, let's talk numbers. A well-ploughed field could yield between 200 to 300 kilograms of barley per hectare. That's a lot of barley bread, folks, and this wasn't just for eating. Barley was your multi-tool of sustenance, used to make everything from bread to beer. Yes, beer. Mesopotamians were brewing up a storm long before it was trendy. They even had a goddess of brewing, Ninkasi, because if you're going to spend your days in a field, you might as well have something to look forward to at the end. But before you pop open that ancient brew, there's the small matter of getting the grain to the granary. Enter the threshing process, where you separate the wheat from the chaff, literally. You de-spread the harvested stalks on a flat surface and let animals trample over them. It's a bit like grape stomping for wine, but with more hooves and less romance. Once the grain was released, you'd winnow it by tossing it into the air so the wind could blow away the lighter chaff. It's a dusty job, but someone's got to do it. Now, let's debunk a myth or two. You might imagine Mesopotamian fields as endless expanses of neatly planted crops, a testament to organized agriculture. The truth: it was a patchwork quilt of small plots, each managed by families or community groups. Unlike the streamlined operations of today, Mesopotamian farming was a communal affair. Everyone had a role, from kids chasing off birds to elders offering guidance. It was less CEO and more village council meeting, with a lot of shouting and mud-throwing thrown in for good measure. And speaking of community, let's not forget the role of women in this agrarian ballet. While the men might be out in the fields with the ploughs and oxen, women were the unsung heroines of the harvest. They were responsible for the planting and weeding, tasks that demanded patience and an eye for detail. Plus, they were the ones who turned those sacks of barley into bread and beer, ensuring that everyone had something to eat and drink at the end of a long day. Talk about multitasking. As for the bigger picture, farming wasn't just about food. It was the foundation of Mesopotamian society. The economy revolved around agriculture. The more you grew, the more you could trade. And trade was crucial, as Mesopotamia wasn't exactly rolling in natural resources. You needed to swap grain for timber from the north or metals from afar. It was an intricate dance of supply and demand, all hinging on the success of those tiny seeds you sowed in the earth. In the grand tapestry of history, Mesopotamian agriculture is a vivid thread, one that weaves together innovation, community, and sheer perseverance. As you lean on your hoe, the sun now a warm memory on the horizon, you can't help but feel connected to those who came before. Every tool, every technique, every ritual is a link in a chain that stretches back to the dawn of civilization. It's a legacy built one furrow at a time, a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity. But let's not get too philosophical. Tomorrow, the cycle continues. The fields await, the ploughs are ready, and those oxen aren't going to hitch themselves. As the first stars appear in the darkening sky, you head home, your feet tired but your heart full. In this ancient land, beneath the same constellations that guided your ancestors, you find a sense of purpose that transcends the ages. And as you drift into sleep, the gentle hum of the fields lulls you into dreams of another day, another harvest, another chapter in the story of Mesopotamia. As the night sky casts its blanket over the land, the rhythmic hum of the fields fades into silence. But amidst this tranquility, the mind remains restless, fueled by thoughts of trade routes and bustling markets. Welcome to the midday break of ancient Mesopotamia, where the real learning begins, not from books, clay tablets, if we're being historically accurate, but from the dynamic dance of economics and survival. Now, let's set the stage. You're in the cradle of civilization, where the rivers run with potential, and grain isn't just sustenance, it's currency. The economics of Mesopotamian farming is like a high-stakes game of chess, with barley and emmer wheat as your key players. Forget gold. In this neck of the woods, grain holds the power. A surplus of barley doesn't just mean more beer or bread. It's your ticket to trade, your bargaining chip in the grand bazaar of life. Picture the scene at a market. A cacophony of traders, each hollering louder than a town crier on market day. It's a vibrant tapestry of commerce, with goods from distant lands up for grabs. You've got copper from Anatolia, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and cedarwood from Lebanon. And what do you have to offer in exchange? That's right, barley. The Mesopotamian economy thrives on this humble grain, and you, my friend, are right in the thick of it. But don't get too carried away by dreams of wealth and prosperity. The reality is that this economy is as volatile as the Tigris during flood season. The price of barley can fluctuate like a stock market on caffeine, influenced by factors as unpredictable as the weather and as fickle as the whims of your trading partners. One bad harvest, and your bargaining power goes from hero to zero faster than you can say ziggurat. Now let's talk numbers. A single bushel of barley could buy you a decent jug of oil or a handful of dates. But save up a few bushels, and you're looking at more substantial goods, perhaps a fine woolen garment or a copper tool. It's all about accumulation, like collecting stamps, but with a bit more sweat equity. And while Mesopotamia wasn't exactly Scrooge McDuck's money bin, the principle was the same. The more you had, the better you could leverage it. This brings us to the barter system, the backbone of Mesopotamian trade. Picture a world without coins or credit cards, where everything is a direct exchange of goods. You've got grain, they've got timber. It's a match made in economic heaven. But here's the thing. Barter isn't as straightforward as it sounds. It's a complex dance of negotiation, where knowing the value of your goods, and theirs, can mean the difference between a fair trade and being taken for a ride. Enter the scribes, the unsung heroes of Mesopotamian commerce. Armed with styluses and clay tablets, they record every transaction, every exchange, every agreement. Think of them as the accountants of the ancient world, ensuring that no one gets shortchanged. Their records are the glue that holds this economic machine together, providing transparency and trust in a world where a handshake seals the deal. But let's not romanticize it too much. The barter system, while fascinating, is riddled with complications. There's no universal measure of value, no standardized currency. It's all relative, and that means every trade requires negotiation, a skill as essential as knowing how to plow a field. You've got to be savvy, quick-witted, and maybe a little bit shrewd. It's not just about what you're trading, it's about how you're trading it. And while we're on the subject, let's debunk a myth or two. You might think of ancient trade as a leisurely stroll through a marketplace, a kind of historical farmer's market. The reality is more akin to the floor of a stock exchange, chaotic and loud, with deals being made in rapid-fire succession. It's a high-energy environment where fortunes can change with the nod of a head or the wave of a hand. So what's at stake? Well, quite a lot. The prosperity of your entire community, for one. The flow of goods isn't just about personal gain. It's about ensuring that everyone has what they need to survive and thrive. In a world where famine is a constant threat and resources are as scarce as hen's teeth, trade is your lifeline. It's the thread that connects you to distant lands, bringing in the essentials that local resources can't provide. And this brings us back to the fields. Every seed you plant, every furrow you plow, is part of a larger economic ecosystem. You're not just a farmer. You're a participant in a grand economic experiment one that hinges on the success of your crops and the skill of your trading. It's a delicate balance, a tightrope walk where one misstep can spell disaster. But amidst this precarious dance, there's a sense of camaraderie. You're not in this alone. The community comes together, pooling resources and knowledge, working towards a common goal. It's a collective effort, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. And as you sit with your fellow farmers over a shared meal, discussing yields and trade routes, there's a sense of pride in being part of something larger than yourself. So, as you return to your work, the midday sun casting long shadows across the fields, remember this. You're not just growing crops, you're growing an economy. Every grain of barley, every stalk of wheat, is a stepping stone in the ever-evolving story of Mesopotamia. And as you take your place in this rich tapestry of trade and barter, know that you're part of a legacy that stretches back to the dawn of civilization. A legacy built on the backs of farmers, traders, and scribes, each contributing to the vibrant pulse of an ancient world. In this land of contrasts, where the mundane meets the monumental, where grain is king and barter is queen, you find your place in the grand narrative. It's an adventure of survival and success, a journey through the heart of humanity's earliest economic endeavors. And as the sun sets on another day, the promise of tomorrow brings the hope of prosperity and the thrill of the trade. As the sun dips lower, casting a warm, golden hue over the fields, you dive back into the rhythm of the afternoon's toil. But this is more than just a grind. It's a dance with destiny, a step in the grand ballet of burgeoning civilizations. Because here's the kicker. Agriculture wasn't just about feeding bellies, it was about feeding ambition. It laid the groundwork, quite literally, for the rise of city-states, turning clusters of mud-brick houses into bustling hubs of power and influence. Now, let's talk Mesopotamian city-states. Imagine a smattering of ancient metropolises like Uruk, and Babylon, each one a throbbing nerve center of trade, politics, and culture. These weren't just places where people lived. They were where ideas collided, where innovation brewed. The secret sauce, agriculture. It enabled these cities to support large populations, creating the need for organized governance, specialized labor, and, drumroll, laws. Enter Hammurabi, the guy who brought the hammer down on disorder. His famous code, not just a collection of legal mumbo-jumbo, but a reflection of a society striving for stability amidst complexity. Picture this. 282 laws etched into a towering stone stele, a kind of ancient FAQ for living in a city-state. From trade disputes to marital issues, Hammurabi had it covered. Law number 42. If a tenant farmer can't meet their obligations, it's not just a personal oops, it's a matter of state interest. This wasn't Hammurabi playing Judge Judy. It was about maintaining the delicate balance that agriculture demanded. Why all the fuss? Because agriculture was the backbone of everything. A failed harvest didn't just mean empty bellies. It meant a potential collapse of the social order. And in a world where a bad season could send shockwaves through the economy, Hammurabi's laws were the societal seatbelts keeping everything in check. It was a legal framework that anchored burgeoning cities, ensuring that commerce could flow and society could thrive. But don't let the grandeur of Hammurabi's laws fool you into thinking it was all sunshine and barley fields. These city-states were often as contentious as a family reunion after a political debate. Competition for resources could be fierce, and agricultural surpluses became the bargaining chips of power. Control the grain, and you controlled the game. This wasn't just about feeding mouths. It was about feeding egos and ambitions. And here's where the gods come in, those celestial celebrities with a penchant for meddling in human affairs. Ever heard of Enlil, the god of storm and air? He was the ancient world's version of a wild card, capable of altering a city's fate with a gust of wind. Farmers didn't just plant seeds. They planted prayers, hoping to appease these divine forces. But let's be real. While the gods got all the credit or blame, the real work happened under the sun, in the dirt, with sweat and toil. The myth of divine intervention made for great stories, but the reality, it was a relentless grind. Farmers had to navigate not just the whims of weather, but the caprices of the gods' earthly representatives, the priests and kings who wielded power like a seasoned blackjack dealer. These rulers claimed they communicated with the gods, and whether that was true or just a clever power play, it kept them in control. It was a divine right, with a side of political acumen. So, while legends painted agriculture as a divine gift, the truth was far more grounded. Behind every myth of bountiful harvests blessed by deities were the untold stories of farmers battling the elements, the economy, and sometimes even each other. The gods might have been the face of agriculture, but the farmers were the backbone, bearing the weight of a civilization's aspirations on their sun-baked shoulders. And as you continue your work, it's crucial to remember that every furrow you plow, every seed you plant, is part of this intricate tapestry of history. You're not just a farmer, you're a cog in the wheel of progress, a participant in the grand experiment of human society. The city-states of Mesopotamia weren't built on dreams alone. They were built on the backs of farmers who turned the unpredictable whims of nature into the predictable rhythms of civilization. As the afternoon sun begins its descent, you can almost feel the weight of history pressing down. An entire society relying on your labor, your skill, your resilience. It's a reminder that behind every great city, every monumental achievement, is the humble story of agriculture. So, as you wipe the sweat from your brow and look out over the fields, remember, you're not just working the land. You're shaping the future. And just like that, the afternoon's labor transitions to evening. The day's work is done, but the story is far from over. There's still more to uncover, more to understand about this ancient world where the seeds of civilization were sown. So stay tuned, because the tale of Mesopotamia is a saga of ambition, struggle, and triumph. A story that continues to unfold under the vast, timeless sky. And so, as the city-states of Mesopotamia find their rhythm in the waning light, you might wonder how this ancient agricultural hustle set the stage for the civilizations that followed. The truth is, the gritty reality of Mesopotamian farming laid down some serious roots. Pun absolutely intended for what came next. It wasn't just about sowing seeds in the soil. It was about sowing seeds of societal structure, economic systems, and yes, even the very essence of what we now call civilization. First off, let's strip away the glamour from the so-called cradle of civilization. Farming in Mesopotamia wasn't some laid-back, rustic idyll. It was more like a relentless CrossFit session, minus the protein shakes. And while we're debunking myths, let's talk about the romanticized notion of the noble farmer, toiling heroically under the benevolent gaze of the gods. In reality, Mesopotamian farmers were more like endurance athletes juggling the whims of nature, the demands of the ruling class, and the ever-looming threat of famine. If they had a mantra, it was probably something like, adapt or starve. Now, if you're wondering why this gritty determination mattered, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Mesopotamian agriculture wasn't just about survival, it was about establishing a blueprint for growth. Those early farmers engineered irrigation systems that were nothing short of miraculous in their complexity. Their canal networks were the arteries through which lifeblood flowed, sustaining not just crops, but entire cities. Without these innovations, cities like Uruk and Babylon wouldn't have been able to support large populations. And that's the kicker. Agriculture made urban life possible, and urban life, in turn, fueled advancements in technology, art, and governance. Speaking of governance, remember that Hammurabi fell with his code of laws. That was one of the first attempts to organize a society around more than just the brute necessities of life. Laws were needed because farming created surpluses, and surpluses led to trade, and trade led to the complexities of human interaction that only a legal framework could manage. It's a bit like building a skyscraper. You need a solid foundation before you can add those top floors. Mesopotamian farmers were laying down that foundation one barley plant at a time. Let's not forget the economic landscape. Barley wasn't just for bread and beer. It was the bedrock of the Mesopotamian economy. Think of it as the Bitcoin of its day, but with a lot less hype and a lot more practical utility. Barley was currency, collateral, and commodity all rolled into one. It was the grease that kept the wheels of trade turning. And when you're trading in a world where the nearest source of timber is hundreds of miles away, you need a reliable medium of exchange. This wasn't just agriculture. It was economic innovation. As for the political scene, farming dictated who held power and why. Control the food supply, and you controlled the people. It's a tale as old as time, and Mesopotamia was no exception. Kings and priests claimed divine authority, but their real power lay in their ability to manage resources. They were the original middle managers, overseeing the distribution of grain and ensuring that the temples and palaces were well stocked. The political hierarchy was less about divine right and more about who could best orchestrate the logistics of feeding a population. And speaking of feeding the population, let's talk about the human element. Mesopotamian farmers weren't just anonymous figures in a historical tapestry. They were innovators in their own right. They were the ones who experimented with crop rotation and selective breeding long before it was cool. They figured out how to maximize yield in a challenging environment, turning adversity into opportunity. In a way, they were the original entrepreneurs, navigating a landscape fraught with challenges and turning it into a thriving economy. Now, what can we learn from these ancient agrarians? Well, for starters, resilience is key. The ability to adapt to changing conditions and innovate solutions is as relevant today as it was then. Mesopotamian farmers didn't have the luxury of modern technology, but they had something just as powerful: ingenuity. They worked with what they had, turning limitations into possibilities. It's a lesson in resourcefulness that transcends time. Moreover, their story is a reminder that the foundations of modern civilization are built on the backs of those who came before us. The comforts and conveniences we enjoy today are the result of centuries of hard work and innovation. It's easy to romanticize the past, but the reality is that progress comes from perseverance. The Mesopotamians didn't just survive. They thrived, and in doing so, they set the stage for everything that followed. And as the sun finally dips below the horizon, it's time to reflect on the legacy of those ancient fields. Mesopotamian farmers weren't just growing crops. They were cultivating the future. Their legacy is etched in the soil of history, a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. So, as we wrap up this journey through time, remember this. Every seed you plant, every challenge you face, is part of a much larger story. It's a story of ambition and perseverance, of grit and glory, and it all began in the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia. As you drift into sleep, let these thoughts linger, a reminder that the past is ever present, shaping the world we live in today. And who knows, maybe tomorrow you'll find a little bit of that Mesopotamian spirit in your own pursuits. After all, the seeds of civilization were sown long ago, but their fruits continue to nourish us in ways we're still discovering. In the bustling streets of 5th century Athens, a city alive with the clatter of sandals and the chatter of eager debaters, the philosopher Socrates was born in 470 BCE. It was a place where democracy was just finding its feet, much like a toddler teetering around with dangerous enthusiasm. This was a time when Athens was the beating heart of the ancient world, with its unique blend of intellectual fervor and political experimentation. But before you get too starry-eyed about the so-called cradle of democracy, let's dive into the grittier details. Athens wasn't just a playground for philosophers and playwrights. It was also a hotbed of political intrigue and societal upheavals. The city-state was a hive of activity, teeming with over 150,000 residents, including slaves, women, and foreigners who had no say in the political arena. Yes, that's right. Democracy in Athens was about as inclusive as an exclusive club with a miles-long waiting list. Only free men, around 30,000 of them, got to play a part in the democratic process. Everyone else was left to watch from the sidelines, much like being invited to a party and told to bring the snacks but not allowed into the dance floor. The socio-political climate was a mix of high-minded ideals and practical chaos. The Athenians prided themselves on their assembly, the ecclesia, where citizens would gather on the Pnyx Hill to shout their opinions, often louder than a troop of enthusiastic seagulls. Decisions were made by a show of hands, which must have looked like a chaotic game of musical chairs, only with more shouting and fewer chairs. Meanwhile, the economy was a curious beast. Athens thrived on trade, its wealth buoyed by silver mines at Laurium, which produced roughly a ton of silver annually. These shiny coins helped Athens build its fleet of triremes, sleek warships that patrolled the Aegean like ancient speedboats. But the lifeblood of Athens wasn't just silver, it was also slaves. An estimated third of the population was enslaved, working the fields, households, and mines to keep the economic machine well-oiled. So, while Athenians praised their freedom, it was built on the backs of those who had none. And then there was the Peloponnesian War, a decades-long slugfest between Athens and Sparta that started in 431 BCE. The war was like a bad breakup, painful, messy, and drawn out over 27 years. It drained resources and morale, leaving the city-state vulnerable and exhausted. A war that was supposed to be a quick show of Athenian might instead turn into a marathon of miseries, reshaping the Athenian psyche and setting the stage for a philosopher with a penchant for questions. Enter Socrates, a man with a face that only a mother or a particularly charitable sculptor could love. Forget the chiseled features of a Greek god. Socrates was famously said to resemble a satyr with a snub nose and bulging eyes. But his looks weren't the only thing that made him stand out in a crowd. It was his relentless questioning that earned him notoriety and not a few enemies. Socrates had a talent for asking questions that made people squirm, a bit like a child asking why the sky is blue and not accepting, because it is, as an answer. His method, the Socratic method, involved asking a series of probing questions to expose contradictions in his interlocutor's thoughts. Imagine a modern-day detective who, instead of solving crimes, dedicated himself to solving the mysteries of logic and ethics. It was an approach that was as frustrating as it was enlightening, often leaving his conversation partners more confused than when they started. Socrates spent his days in the Agora, the bustling marketplace of Athens, engaging in dialogue with anyone who would listen or couldn't escape fast enough. This was a time when the marketplace wasn't just for buying olives and pottery, but was also the social media of the day, a place to exchange ideas and gossip. Socrates was the original troll, but instead of hiding behind a keyboard, he confronted his targets face to face, asking questions that cut through pretense and ego like a hot knife through butter. His questioning didn't just earn him admirers, it also drew the ire of many. Athenians, it turned out, didn't particularly enjoy having their cherished beliefs challenged. Who would have thought? But Socrates was undeterred. He pursued truth with the tenacity of a bloodhound on a scent, questioning everything from the nature of justice to the existence of the gods, much to the chagrin of the city's elite. And while he was notorious for his philosophical pursuits, Socrates wasn't exactly raking in the drachmas. In fact, he lived a life of such austerity that today he'd probably be mistaken for a minimalist icon. He wore the same tattered cloak day in and day out, indifferent to wealth and status. His wife, Xanthippe, reportedly had the patience of a saint, or perhaps the resignation of someone who realized that nagging a philosopher was like trying to herd cats. Socrates' life unfolded against the backdrop of a city that was a cauldron of ideas and conflicts. Athens was both a beacon of culture and a stage for political theatre, its citizens as likely to debate philosophy as they were to engage in war. It was a place where comedy and tragedy were not just genres of theatre, but apt descriptions of daily life. In this environment, Socrates' philosophy was both a product of his time and a challenge to it, a testament to the enduring power of asking the right, or infuriating, questions. Socrates' philosophy was a bit like ancient Athens itself, a beautiful mess. He was the kind of guy who took loitering to an art form, haunting the Agora like a spectral presence with a mission. And while many Athenians were busy turning silver into ships and slaves into wealth, Socrates was busy turning ideas on their heads. Forget the 9-to-5 grind. Socrates was more about the ask-till-you-drop lifestyle. In a city where everyone had a role to play, from the strategoi leading armies to the merchants haggling over olive oil, Socrates chose the role of the eternal questioner. You see, Socrates had a knack for asking questions that made people feel like they were standing on a rug that was being pulled out from under them. This was the Socratic method in action, a relentless series of questions designed to expose the ignorance lurking beneath the surface of assumed knowledge. If Socrates were alive today, he'd probably be that friend who never lets you win an argument, no matter how trivial. His method was less about finding the right answers and more about discovering the right questions to ask, a bit like playing an intellectual game of whack-a-mole, where every answer just raises more questions. Now, you might ask, why did Socrates spend his days pestering people instead of, say, pursuing a lucrative career in pottery or politics? The truth is, Socrates was allergic to the idea of business as usual. To him, the unexamined life wasn't worth living, a sentiment that sounds noble until you realize it doesn't pay the bills. But Socrates wasn't in it for the money. His currency was dialogue, and he was rich in it. In a society that valued appearances and status, Socrates was more interested in peeling back the layers to reveal the naked truth. Not everyone appreciated his approach. In fact, Socrates had a talent for making enemies, as well as followers. It's not hard to see why. Questioning someone's deeply held beliefs is rarely a recipe for popularity. Yet, Socrates attracted a motley crew of young Athenians who were drawn to his unorthodox style. These were the original hipsters, if you will, captivated by a man who wore the same threadbare cloak every day and cared more about the state of your soul than the state of your bank account. Among his followers was the young and impressionable Plato, who would go on to become a philosophical giant in his own right. Plato was like the ultimate fanboy, documenting Socrates' dialogues and preserving his legacy for future generations. If it weren't for Plato, Socrates might have been just another eccentric footnote in history, forgotten like yesterday's gossip. But Socrates' impact wasn't just philosophical. His method was a reflection of the democratic ideals that Athens aspired to, even if reality often fell short. In a city where citizens could voice their opinions in the ecclesia, Socrates' relentless questioning was a mirror held up to the democratic process itself. It was a reminder that true understanding required more than just voting on issues. It required a deep and often uncomfortable examination of one's beliefs. This didn't sit well with everyone. Many Athenians saw Socrates as a threat to the social order, a gadfly, as he would later describe himself, sent to sting the sluggish horse of the state into action. And like any good gadfly, Socrates was hard to ignore and even harder to swat away. His presence in the agora was a constant reminder that the pursuit of truth was a messy, disruptive, and often unwelcome endeavor. But let's not romanticize Socrates too much. While he was undeniably a thinker ahead of his time, he was also a man of his time, with all the prejudices and limitations that entailed. Women, for example, were noticeably absent from his dialogues, reflecting a society that sidelined half its population. And while Socrates questioned many things, he didn't question the institution of slavery, which propped up the Athenian economy, a glaring oversight for a philosopher so committed to truth. Socrates' life was a study in contradictions. He was a man who valued wisdom above all yet claimed to know nothing. He challenged the status quo while respecting the laws of the city. And though he eschewed material wealth, his ideas left a legacy richer than any silver mine. In the bustling heart of Athens, Socrates carved out a space for introspection and dialogue, pushing his fellow citizens to think harder, question more, and never settle for easy answers. As the Peloponnesian War dragged on, leaving Athens weary and vulnerable, Socrates' questions took on a new urgency. In a city that was struggling to maintain its ideals in the face of adversity, Socrates' insistence on examining the moral and ethical foundations of society was both timely and timeless. It was a call to action, a challenge to look beyond the immediate concerns of war and wealth to the deeper questions of justice and virtue. But not everyone was ready to heed that call. For every admirer Socrates gained, he also garnered a detractor. His method, so effective at exposing contradictions, was seen by some as corrosive to the fabric of society. After all, a little questioning is healthy, but too much can start to unravel the very threads that hold a community together. And in the eyes of the Athenian elite, Socrates was doing just that, poking holes in the established order and leaving behind a trail of discontent. In the end, Socrates' relentless pursuit of truth would lead him to a courtroom where he would face charges of corrupting the youth and impiety. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's leave Socrates where he belongs, in the Agora, surrounded by a chorus of voices, each one echoing the questions he dared to ask. His legacy, like the city he called home, is a testament to the power of ideas to shape and challenge the world. And in a place like Athens, where the past was always present and the future uncertain, a man like Socrates was both a product and a provocateur of his time. In the Agora, Socrates was putting a philosophical twist on the phrase, stirring the pot. But little did he know that the pot was about to boil over. Fast forward to 399 BCE, when the Athenian legal system decided it was time for Socrates to face the music, or perhaps more aptly, face the gavel. Charges were brought against him for corrupting the youth and impiety. Sounds like a bad Yelp review from the local PTA, but in ancient Athens, these were serious accusations. Let's start with the charge of corrupting the youth. Now, you might be picturing a decrepit Socrates handing out copies of Rebel Without a Cause, like a philosophical James Dean, but the reality was a bit more mundane. His so-called corruption was more about encouraging young Athenians to question authority, which, in a society that valued stability as much as Athens did, was the equivalent of teaching them to juggle flaming torches. The youth in question included future philosophers like Plato, who was practically Socrates' hype man. If corrupting the youth means inspiring one of the greatest philosophers of all time, then sign me up. Then there was the charge of impiety, which basically translates to a failure to show proper reverence to the gods. To understand this, we need to peek behind the curtain of Athenian religion, which wasn't just about rituals and offerings, but was also a political tool. The gods were woven into the fabric of the state, much like celebrities in a modern ad campaign. You didn't just question them, you endorsed them. Socrates, however, preferred to question everything, including the divine. He didn't outright deny the gods, but he did have this annoying habit of suggesting that maybe we didn't know as much about them as we thought. That's like telling an Instagram influencer their follower count doesn't actually define their worth. True, but not what they want to hear. The trial of Socrates was less about the charges themselves and more about the political climate of the time. Athens was still licking its wounds from the Peloponnesian War, and the political atmosphere was as tense as a tightrope walker over a pit of hungry lions. Socrates was essentially caught in a post-war blame game where the Athenians were desperately looking for a scapegoat, and his constant questioning made him a prime target. He was like a canary in a coal mine, warning of deeper societal issues, but instead of listening, the miners just decided to get rid of the bird. Enter the sources of our story. Plato and Xenophon, the ancient world's equivalent of PR managers. Both were students of Socrates and had their own agendas when documenting his trial. Plato, in particular, painted Socrates as the ultimate philosopher martyr, a man who would rather die than betray his principles. His Apology is less a historical account and more a rhetorical masterpiece. Imagine a courtroom drama where the defense attorney is also the director, producer, and biggest fan. Xenophon, on the other hand, was more of a pragmatist, focusing on Socrates' practical wisdom. He was the ancient world's version of the Mythbusters, keen on demystifying Socrates' life. But even his accounts are colored by personal bias. Both authors had a vested interest in depicting Socrates as a hero of philosophical thought, which makes their accounts as impartial as a parent judging a school talent show. So, what was the political undercurrent of this trial? Imagine a city-state trying to regain its footing after a catastrophic war, its people disillusioned, and its democracy faltering. The trial wasn't just about Socrates. It was a statement about dissent. Athens was like a ship caught in a storm, and Socrates was the sailor insisting on questioning the captain's orders. In such turbulent times, the last thing the Athenians wanted was someone rocking the boat. The trial itself was a spectacle worthy of ancient Athens. Socrates, ever the contrarian, used his defense not to curry favor, but to continue questioning, as if he were daring the jury to think for themselves. He famously refused to propose an alternative punishment, suggesting instead that he be rewarded with free meals for life, a cheeky nod to the kind of honor reserved for Olympic victors. It's like being on trial for tax evasion and asking to be appointed the head of the IRS. The jury wasn't amused, and the verdict was inevitable. Socrates was sentenced to death by hemlock, a poison that was the ancient equivalent of a lethal injection, though with a more botanical flair. The cost of free speech in Athens was paid in full, not with silver, but with the life of its most infamous gadfly. Yet, Socrates met his end with the same calm demeanor he brought to his endless questioning, leaving his followers to carry the torch of his ideas. His death was a cautionary tale about the fragility of free thought in times of crisis, a reminder that even in a city that prided itself on democratic ideals, dissent was still a dangerous game. And so, Socrates' trial became legend, a story retold through the ages as a testament to the power and peril of speaking truth to power. In the grand tapestry of history, his trial was a thread that highlighted the complexities of a society caught between its ideals and its insecurities. It's a story that echoes through time, a reminder that the pursuit of truth is rarely a straightforward path, often fraught with obstacles and opposition. But in a world that often prefers comfort over confrontation, Socrates' legacy challenges us to keep asking questions, even when the answers are unwelcome. So, as we leave the trial of Socrates, we're left with the haunting image of a man who chose death over silence, a philosopher who dared to challenge the status quo and paid the ultimate price. His legacy lives on, a testament to the enduring power of ideas and the cost of speaking one's mind in a world that isn't always ready to listen. But don't pack up your philosophical toolkit just yet. There's more to explore as we continue this journey through the life and times of Socrates, the man who made questioning an art form. With Socrates' trial now behind us, we pivot to the philosopher's final days, a saga that would make even the most stoic among us clamor for a box of tissues. Picture Socrates in a damp Athenian prison cell, surrounded by shadows and the faint echoes of bustling life outside. It wasn't exactly a five-star accommodation, but when your lifetime hobby is irritating the status quo, luxury isn't exactly on the menu. So what did Socrates do in prison? Did he spend his time sulking or perhaps contemplating a daring escape, a la ancient Greek Shawshank Redemption? Not quite. You see, Socrates was offered a literal get-out-of-jail-free card. His pals, notably Crito, were ready to break him out, covering all the costs like a group of friends pooling cash for a surprise getaway. But Socrates, ever the contrarian, refused. Why? Because he believed in laws, even the ones that condemned him. The man had principles like a steel trap, and he wasn't about to snap them open just to save his skin. Crito, his old friend and fellow philosopher, tried to persuade him otherwise, and it wasn't just a casual convo over coffee. Crito laid out a plan as slick as a heist movie, complete with bribes and a safe house in Thessaly. But Socrates, in his typical fashion, turned the conversation into a philosophical debate. He argued that escaping would violate his principles, much like trying to win an argument by shouting louder. Technically possible, but morally bankrupt. Now, let's talk about those final philosophical dialogues. Plato, ever the diligent student, captured these in works like Crito and Phaedo. Imagine these dialogues as the ancient version of a TED talk, only with more chitons and fewer PowerPoint slides. In Crito, Socrates explains his reasoning with the clarity of a man who knows he's on the brink of history. The dialogue is as much about civic duty as it is a masterclass in rational thought. Socrates was a guy who could argue that 2 + 2 = fish, and somehow you'd walk away nodding. Then there's Phaedo, where Plato records Socrates' last moments in a narrative that would make even the toughest hearts flutter. As Socrates philosophized about the immortality of the soul, his friends, Phaedo, Crito, and Apollodorus, among others, listened with bated breath. This was a farewell party with a twist. Instead of cake, they were served hemlock, and instead of party favors, they got a lesson on life, death, and everything in between. The conversation ranged from the nature of the soul to the afterlife, with Socrates calmly addressing the big questions like a seasoned stand-up comedian delivering his final set. And let's not ignore the economic realities. The execution wasn't just a philosophical spectacle, it was also a public expense. The state provided the hemlock, a cost-effective solution compared to the more elaborate methods of execution preferred by other cultures. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of budget cuts in the justice system, efficient, if a little lacking in flair. Socrates' acceptance of his fate wasn't just stoic, it was practically legendary. He drank the hemlock with the same nonchalance you might reserve for a morning espresso. His friends wept, but Socrates stayed calm, instructing them to pay his debt to Asclepius, the god of healing, a final jab at the irony of life. It was as if he were saying, "Thanks for the cure, death. I owe you one." This serene acceptance turned Socrates into a martyr, a status that ironically elevated him to the very heights of fame he had always ignored. His death was the ancient world's version of going viral, proving once again that nothing sells like a good execution story. Socrates' demise was not just the end of a life, but the beginning of a legend, a narrative that would be retold through millennia as a testament to the power of principles over survival. Yet, let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. The real lesson here is less about martyrdom and more about the stubbornness of truth. Socrates' choices remind us that ideals often come with a hefty price tag. In a way, he held up a mirror to society, reflecting its flaws with such clarity that even the most ardent detractors had to squint in discomfort. So, as we leave Socrates in his final moments, we're left pondering the paradox of his life. A man who lived by questioning everything, yet found peace in accepting the inevitable. His death wasn't just a closing act, it was the final question mark in a life full of them. And in that question, perhaps, lies the secret to his enduring legacy, the relentless pursuit of truth, even when the answers are as bitter as hemlock. As Socrates' life came to its dramatic conclusion, his legacy was only just beginning to unfurl across the tapestry of history. Flash forward a bit, and you find that Socrates' influence is like a philosophical ripple effect that refuses to fade, bouncing off the shores of Western thought with relentless consistency. But let's not get swept up in the romanticized image of Socrates as some solitary genius, a lone wolf howling profound truths into the Athenian night. No, Socrates was more like the conductor of an intellectual orchestra, with a chorus of voices ready to riff off his melodies. Here's the deal. Socrates never wrote down a single word, not a jot, not a scribble. His ideas, as profound as they were, could have vanished faster than ice in the Athenian sun. Yet, thanks to his disciples, particularly Plato and Xenophon, Socrates' thoughts were etched into the annals of history. They were the real MVPs, most valuable philosophers, who ensured that Socratic wisdom was preserved, packaged, and passed down like a philosophical baton. Plato's dialogues are essentially Socratic fan fiction, where he captured the spirit of his mentor's teachings, even if he did add a bit of his own flair. Now, let's debunk the myth of Socratic solitude. The guy was far from a hermit brooding over existential dilemmas in isolation. In reality, Socrates was an intellectual socialite, engaging with the bustling Athenian agora like a philosophical DJ, spinning the hottest existential tracks. He was surrounded by a crew of thinkers and students, an ancient squad, if you will, who contributed to and refined his ideas. This collaborative nature of Socratic philosophy was as vital as the questions themselves. The conversations he sparked were less monologues and more symphonies of thought, with every participant adding their own notes and nuances. But why does any of this matter? Let's talk legacy. Socrates' ideas laid the groundwork for Western philosophy, building a foundation more enduring than the Parthenon itself. The Socratic method, that relentless questioning technique, became the cornerstone of critical thinking, a tool as essential in classrooms today as it was in the noisy Athenian streets. And it wasn't just the philosophers who took note. Socrates' influence seeped into the very fabric of Western civilization, shaping education, law, and ethics in ways that are still palpable today. Take the Socratic method, for instance. This isn't just some dusty relic of ancient pedagogy. It's alive and kicking in modern classrooms, courtrooms, and anywhere critical thinking is valued over rote memorization. When you're in a debate and someone hits you with a chain of questions that makes your argument unravel like a cheap sweater, you've got Socrates to thank. Or curse. This method pushes us to think deeper, to question assumptions, and to strive for clarity, like mental CrossFit, but for the soul. And let's not forget his impact on ethics and morality. Socrates was the original moral philosopher, probing the nature of virtue and the essence of a good life. His inquiries into justice, courage, and the examined life were like philosophical seeds planted in the fertile ground of human consciousness. Over time, these ideas sprouted into the ethical frameworks that guide our societies today. Take a look at the world's legal systems, and you'll see echoes of Socratic thought, challenging us to consider not just the letter of the law, but the spirit behind it. Now, you might be wondering how Socrates' legacy could endure when his ideas were essentially verbal Snapchat messages. Here today, gone tomorrow. The secret lies in the power of dialogue. By engaging others in conversation, Socrates ensured that his ideas were dynamic, evolving with every interaction. They weren't stagnant doctrines but living discussions, adapting to new contexts and challenges. This collaborative exchange was key to their survival and continued relevance. But let's not give Socrates all the credit. His legacy owes much to the vibrant intellectual climate of Athens, a city that was the ancient world's version of Silicon Valley for philosophy. Athens was a hub of innovation, where ideas were currency and debate was the local pastime. Socrates thrived in this environment, and his legacy was a product of this unique cultural ecosystem. Without the fertile ground of Athenian society, Socrates' seeds of thought might never have taken root. In conclusion, Socrates' legacy is a fascinating blend of myth and reality, a testament to the power of ideas to transcend time and space. His life reminds us that while genius often shines through individuals, it is the collaborative spirit that amplifies its impact. Socrates may have been the gadfly of Athens, but his ideas were like honey to the generations that followed, sweetening the pursuit of truth and justice. Even today, his legacy challenges us to ask the hard questions, to seek understanding, and to never settle for easy answers. In a world that often prefers the comfort of certainty, Socrates invites us to embrace the uncertainty of inquiry, to see the question mark not as a symbol of doubt, but as a beacon of discovery. And there you have it, a journey through the life and legacy of Socrates, the philosopher who turned questioning into an art form and left a lasting imprint on the canvas of history. As we close this chapter, let's take a cue from Socrates himself. Keep asking, keep questioning, and keep exploring the rich tapestry of human thought. After all, the unexamined life may not be worth living, but the examined life is a never-ending adventure. In the bustling streets of late 15th century Spain, where the scent of churros mingled with the clatter of horse-drawn carts, young Hernán Cortés was not exactly what you'd call a straight-A student. Picture a lad with more enthusiasm for adventure than the courtroom. Born in 1485 in the quaint town of Medellin, in the province of Extremadura, Cortés was expected to follow the well-trodden path to lawyerdom. But much like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, young Hernán and the legal profession were not a match made in heaven. Let's pause for a moment and consider the socio-economic landscape of Spain at the time. The country was fresh off the Reconquista's triumph, having booted out the last Muslim rulers from Granada in 1492, and now it was riding high on a wave of newfound national unity. But even with all the fanfare, Spain was itching for more gold, more glory, and more land. The New World, with its tales of abundant riches, was the 16th century equivalent of a modern-day lottery, a chance to strike it rich overnight. Back to Cortés. His parents, Martin Cortés de Monroy and Catalina Pizarro Altamirano, had aspirations for him that included a gavel and a wig, but Hernán had other plans. Enrolled at the University of Salamanca at 14, Cortés was supposed to be knee-deep in legal texts. Instead, he quickly discovered that his talents lay elsewhere, like charming the socks off anyone within earshot. After 2 years of what could generously be called studying, Cortés dropped out. His law books collected dust, while his dreams of adventure gathered steam. Now, Cortés wasn't the only restless spirit in Spain. The nation was buzzing with tales of Christopher Columbus's voyages across the Atlantic, promising unclaimed territories teeming with wealth. The New World was more than just a collection of distant lands. It was a siren call to every ambitious soul who had ever daydreamed of fame and fortune. That included Cortés, who had heard enough tales of gold and glory to set his sights westward. But before he could become the infamous conquistador, Cortés had to deal with some rather comedic setbacks. At 19, while contemplating his future, Cortés decided to join a military expedition to the New World under the command of Nicolás de Ovando. But fate, with its penchant for irony, had Cortés sidelined by a minor injury. How? By falling off a wall during a romantic escapade. Yes, our would-be conqueror was thwarted by a wall, not unlike a cartoon character with more bravado than balance. Undeterred by such slapstick misfortunes, Cortés eventually made it to Hispaniola in 1504, albeit 2 years behind schedule. There, he began his career not as a swashbuckling hero, but as a notary, a less than glamorous gig involving more paperwork than plundering. It was a start, and it put him on the map, or at least on some map, if not the one he dreamed of. Fast forward a few years, and the winds of opportunity blew Cortés to Cuba, where he served under the governor, Diego Velázquez. Cortés's charisma and cunning soon earned him a spot at Velázquez's side, climbing the ranks from secretary to treasurer. But if history has taught us anything, it's that ambitious men like Cortés don't stay in the shadows for long. While Velázquez was busy playing it safe, Cortés had his eyes on the mainland, where whispers of untapped empires tantalized his ambitions. Let's talk numbers. By the time Cortés was gearing up for his big break, the Spanish crown was eagerly betting on the riches of the New World. In exchange for the risk, adventurers like Cortés were promised a cut of the spoils, an enticing deal for those willing to risk life and limb. And risk he did, eventually garnishing a fleet of 11 ships and about 500 men for his Mexican expedition, a venture that would cost an estimated 20,000 gold pesos. For context, that was a king's ransom back then, enough to make even the most fervent risk-taker pause. But pause Cortés did not. In a world where fortune favored the bold, Cortés understood that history was written by the victor, or in his case, the ambitious dropout who refused to play by the rules. The stage was set, the players were ready, and Hernán Cortés was about to embark on a journey that would be anything but dull. As they say, the rest is history, but we're just getting started. With the wind of ambition filling his sails, Hernán Cortés set foot on the Caribbean shores, ready to turn his dreams into reality, or at least a reality show of 16th century proportions. Landing in Hispaniola, he'd swapped the dusty law books of Salamanca for the sun-soaked islands, where the real action was as tantalizing as the tales that had propelled him across the Atlantic. But before he could claim his slice of New World pie, Cortés had to navigate the labyrinthine Spanish colonial system, a bureaucratic beast that was as absurd as it was formidable. Hispaniola was the staging ground for Spanish expeditions, a sort of colonial Ellis Island, where adventurers signed up for glory and found themselves entangled in paperwork. Cortés, ever the opportunist, initially took on the role of a notary. Sure, it wasn't the swashbuckling gig he'd envisioned, but it was a foot in the door, and Cortés knew how to wedge his boot in just the right way. Here he honed his diplomatic skills, mastering the art of alliance-making with the dexterity of a social chess player plotting several moves ahead. But let's not kid ourselves. Cortés wasn't winning any congeniality contests. His charm was as dangerous as it was disarming. He could sweet-talk his way into a room and just as easily talk you out of your last coin. In the New World, where allegiances were as fickle as a tropical storm, Cortés was a maestro of manipulation. He forged alliances with indigenous leaders, made promises he often had no intention of keeping, and when the winds changed, he switched sides faster than you could say gold pesos. Speaking of gold, the promise of wealth was the carrot dangling in front of every conquistador's nose. And in Cuba, Cortés saw a chance to upgrade his notary gig for something with a bit more sparkle. Under the watchful eye of Governor Diego Velázquez, Cortés climbed the colonial ladder, going from secretary to treasurer. But if you think he was content with balancing the books, think again. Cortés had his eye on the mainland, where rumors of empires rich with gold were the 16th century equivalent of a viral TikTok challenge, irresistible and potentially life-altering. Now, why was Cuba so important? Well, it was the launching pad for further conquests. The Spanish crown, in its quest for riches, had set up a colonial system that was more convoluted than a telenovela plot. It required expeditions to be approved, captains to be licensed, and profits to be meticulously accounted for. But rules were made to be bent, and Cortés was more flexible than a yoga instructor. When Velázquez finally authorized an expedition to Mexico in 1519, Cortés was ready. Or rather, he made himself ready by leveraging every connection and coin at his disposal. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate the bureaucratic absurdity of the Spanish colonial system. Imagine a series of hoops so complex that even seasoned hoop jumpers got tangled. Expeditions needed royal approval, but governors had enough power to make or break a venture. It was a delicate dance of politics, promises, and paperwork. Cortés, with his knack for charming the socks off anyone, managed to secure not just the governor's blessing, but also a fleet of 11 ships and 500 eager men. He was nothing if not resourceful, a trait that would serve him well on his Mexican adventure. But before you think Cortés was just a smooth-talking charmer, remember he had a ruthless side sharper than a conquistador's sword. When Velázquez started having second thoughts about the expedition, suspecting Cortés might just be too ambitious for his own good, Cortés didn't wait around for the governor to pull the plug. He set sail under the cover of darkness, leaving Velázquez with little more than a handful of official complaints and a lot of frustration. Cortés's motto might as well have been ask forgiveness, not permission. In this high-stakes game of conquest, Cortés was both player and referee, rewriting the rules as he went along. His early exploits in Hispaniola and Cuba were just the opening act in a saga that would see him clash with empires, gamble with lives, and etch his name into history. Whether as hero or villain, well, that depended on who you asked. But one thing was certain. Hernán Cortés was just getting started, and the New World was about to feel the full force of his ambition. Stay tuned, because the next chapter in Cortés's story is anything but predictable. With the sails of ambition unfurled, Cortés was off to the races, or rather, to the Aztec Empire, the big kahuna of Mesoamerican civilizations. The year was 1519, and it was time for Cortés to swap his notary papers for the sword and sail. The journey wasn't just a geographical leap from Cuba to the Yucatan Peninsula, but a leap into the unknown, where maps were as vague as a politician's promise, and the stakes as high as a Hollywood blockbuster. But fear not, our protagonist wasn't alone. He had a motley crew of 500 men, 11 ships, and a smattering of horses, all ready to test their luck in the greatest game of Monopoly the world had ever seen. Upon landing in Mexico, Cortés didn't waste time. He knew that the key to any good conquest was a healthy dose of alliances and a sprinkle of divide-and-conquer tactics. Enter the Totonacs and the Tlaxcalans, indigenous groups who weren't exactly sending the Aztecs Christmas cards. In fact, they were more than happy to team up with the Spaniards if it meant sticking it to their imperial overlords. Cortés, with his uncanny knack for making friends and then exploiting them, saw this as his golden ticket into the heart of the Aztec Empire. But before we get too carried away with the romance of alliances, let's talk logistics, because folks, this was less a seamless military campaign and more a logistical nightmare wrapped in a fever dream. Imagine schlepping those 11 ships and 500 men through the jungle, where the mosquitoes were hungrier than the conquistadors, and the terrain was more treacherous than a medieval battlefield. If you're picturing a well-oiled machine, think again. This was more like herding cats, with Cortés playing the role of the perpetually exasperated shepherd. Yet, despite the odds, Cortés managed to reach the city of Collula. Now here is where the story takes a dark turn and that romanticized version of history starts to crumble. The Collula massacre, as it's known, was less of a strategic victory and more of a brutal slaughter. Cortés, suspecting a plot against him, decided that a preemptive strike was in order. The result? Estimates suggest around 3,000 Collulans were killed in a single day, a grim reminder that Cortés's charisma was matched only by his ruthlessness. But let's not get too bogged down in bloodshed because, for better or worse, this paved the way to Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, a city that would make even the most jaded urban planner swoon. Picture this. An island city with canals crisscrossing the landscape, bustling markets, and a population of around 200,000. It was Venice meets New York City, but with more jaguars and feathered headdresses. Cortés, ever the opportunist, was both dazzled and determined to make Tenochtitlan his own. And here, where luck, that fickle mistress, decided to throw Cortés a bone. News of the Spanish arrival had reached Moctezuma II, the Aztec emperor, who, depending on which story you believe, either saw Cortés as a potential ally or a terrifying threat. But here's the kicker. Moctezuma might have believed Cortés was a god, or at least sent by them, thanks to a prophecy about the return of Quetzalcoatl, a feathered serpent deity. Now, whether this was true belief or a clever political maneuver by Moctezuma is up for debate, but it's safe to say Cortés milked it for all it was worth. Cortés and his men waltzed into Tenochtitlan in November 1519, and for a moment it seemed like the Spanish had struck gold, both literally and metaphorically. Moctezuma welcomed them with open arms and gifts of gold, which only fueled the Spanish appetite for conquest. But remember, this was not a peaceful exchange of cultures, but a ticking time bomb. The cultural clashes were seismic. Imagine two planets colliding, with neither fully comprehending the other's customs, language, or intentions. Now, you might think that with Moctezuma playing host, Cortés could sit back and relax, but the reality was far from it. The political situation was more precarious than a tightrope walk over a pit of hungry crocodiles. Moctezuma was a man caught between a rock and a hard place, trying to appease the Spaniards while keeping his own nobles from staging a coup. Cortés, on the other hand, was nervously aware that Velázquez might send more men to arrest him. This wasn't just a conquest. It was a chess game with more at stake than just pride. And then came smallpox, the uninvited guest that would have made even the most seasoned plague doctor wince. In 1520, the disease swept through Tenochtitlan like wildfire, decimating the Aztec population. Here's the sobering truth. While Cortés might have been a skilled strategist, it was smallpox that did the heavy lifting, wiping out large swathes of the population and leaving the Aztecs reeling. The romantic notion of a heroic conquest fades under the harsh light of this biological reality. So what's the takeaway here? Hernán Cortés was no doubt a figure of legend, but his successes were as much about opportunistic alliances and sheer luck as they were about military prowess. The romanticized tales of dashing conquistadors conquering vast empires with just a handful of men overlook the gritty, often brutal realities of conquest, where disease, deception, and deception played as much a role as daring and determination. As we edge closer to the climax of Cortés's saga, remember this. History is a tapestry woven with threads of myth and fact, legend and reality. The story of Hernán Cortés is one where the lines blur, revealing a conquistador who was as much a product of his time as he was a shaper of it. But hold your horses, because there's more to this tale of ambition, conquest, and consequence. We're not done yet, and the next chapter promises more twists than a soap opera finale. Stay tuned, you won't want to miss it. As we edge closer to the climax of Cortés' saga, the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan stood like a shimmering jewel in a crown, breathtaking and vulnerable. The Spaniards, led by Cortés, found themselves in a city that was a marvel of engineering and a nightmare of political tension. Moctezuma's hospitality was a double-edged sword, one that Cortés wielded with the precision of a surgeon and the subtlety of a sledgehammer. His charming facade hid a mind as calculating as a chess grandmaster's. Every move in this deadly game was fraught with risk and reward. Cortés's approach was not just about military might. It was psychological warfare wrapped in the guise of diplomacy. Consider his decision to take Moctezuma hostage, a move that would make any Game of Thrones plot twist look like child's play. The rationale: control the emperor, control the empire. But this wasn't just a matter of shackling a man. It was about fettering an entire civilization. Cortés understood the optics. With Moctezuma under his thumb, he could manipulate not just the Aztecs, but also his own men, who were as likely to mutiny as they were to follow him into the jaws of death. Yet, as with any plan hatched in the pressure cooker of an occupied city, things began to spiral. The Spanish, outnumbered and aware that their welcome could evaporate at any moment, were on a knife's edge. Enter the infamous La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows, a debacle of epic proportions that saw Cortés and his men attempting a midnight escape with their ill-gotten gains. Picture it: a pitch-black night, a ragtag band of conquistadors laden with gold, and a city suddenly alive with the fury of betrayal. It said that the canals of Tenochtitlan ran red with blood as the Spanish tried to flee, losing hundreds of men to Aztec warriors and the treacherous waters alike. Now let's talk logistics, or rather, the lack thereof. Cortés's retreat was less a strategic withdrawal and more a desperate dash for survival. The Spanish had to abandon much of their plunder, and those who weren't killed were left to count their losses in both men and morale. But if you think this was the end of Cortés, think again. He regrouped with his remaining forces, including a growing number of indigenous allies who saw the Spanish as the lesser of two evils. The Tlaxcalans, in particular, were instrumental, providing not just manpower but local knowledge that was worth its weight in gold, or, in this case, lives. With his forces bolstered, Cortés set his sights on retaking Tenochtitlan. The siege that followed was nothing short of catastrophic. For 93 days, the Spanish and their allies encircled the city, cutting off supplies and launching relentless attacks. The Aztecs, despite their valiant resistance, were no match for the combined assault of European military tactics and the devastating impact of smallpox, which continued to ravage the population. Speaking of numbers, the human cost was staggering. Estimates suggest that the population of Tenochtitlan, once around 200,000, plummeted as tens of thousands perished from disease, starvation, and conflict. The economic toll was equally severe. The city, once a bustling hub of trade and culture, was left in ruins. Cortés's tactics, questionable at best and brutal at worst, were effective in the most devastating sense, reducing a vibrant civilization to ashes. But here's where the tale takes yet another twist. In the aftermath of the city's fall in August 1521, Cortés faced the challenge of transforming chaos into colonial order. It was one thing to conquer an empire. It was another to govern it. Cortés set about rebuilding Tenochtitlan, this time as Mexico City, the new capital of New Spain. He introduced European systems of governance and agriculture, trying to blend two worlds into one, a task as complex as it sounds. The economic reality of colonization was harsh. The Spanish crown, eager to see returns on its investment, imposed a tribute system that strained the resources of the indigenous population. Meanwhile, Cortés rewarded his men with encomiendas, grants of land and labor that effectively turned them into feudal lords. It was a system that promised wealth for some at the expense of many, and one that sowed the seeds of future discontent. Amidst this, Cortés navigated the treacherous waters of colonial politics. He was hailed as a hero by some, a tyrant by others. His relationship with the Spanish crown was a delicate dance. One misstep could see him stripped of power or worse. Yet, for a time, he managed to maintain his grip on New Spain, wielding authority with a mix of charisma and cunning that had become his trademark. In the grand tapestry of history, Cortés's conquest of Tenochtitlan was both an end and a beginning. It marked the fall of one of the world's great civilizations and the rise of a new colonial order. But as we know, the story of Hernán Cortés doesn't end here. Like any good saga, there's more intrigue, more ambition, and yes, more chaos to come. As we prepare to dive into the next chapter of this riveting tale, remember, history is more than a collection of dates and names. It's a living, breathing narrative that continues to unfold with all its complexities and contradictions. Stay tuned, because the story of Cortés is far from over. And so, with the city of Tenochtitlan reduced to rubble and dreams of glory fulfilled, Hernán Cortés found himself standing at a crossroads of history and personal legacy. But if you think he rode off into the sunset, basking in the glow of his conquests, think again. The Spanish crown, ever the demanding sponsor, wasn't just handing out accolades and medals. No, they wanted a return on investment, and Cortés was expected to deliver. The man who once danced through the chaos of conquest now faced the grueling monotony of administration. As the new governor of New Spain, Cortés had to pivot from conqueror to manager, a transition as smooth as a square wheel. Picture him juggling the complexities of colonial governance like a circus performer with one too many flaming torches. His task, to consolidate Spanish rule and ensure the flow of wealth back to Spain. That meant dealing with a bureaucratic labyrinth more convoluted than your average tax code. Cortés was soon embroiled in legal skirmishes, defending his actions and authority against rivals both in the New World and back in Spain. Ah, Spain, the land of churros, bullfights, and political intrigue. The Spanish court was a den of schemers, and Cortés, once the darling of Europe's elite, found himself increasingly out of favor. His downfall was as swift as his rise had been meteoric. In 1528, he traveled to Spain to clear his name and reclaim his position, but he discovered that his enemies had woven a tapestry of accusations against him. Embezzlement, misuse of power, and even the murder of his own wife. Cortés's reputation was being shredded faster than a confetti cannon at a fiesta. Despite these challenges, Cortés managed to charm his way back into the good graces of Emperor Charles V, securing the title of Marquis of the Valley of Oaxaca. Not too shabby, right? But here's the kicker. He was stripped of his governorship. Cortés, the man who had once commanded empires, was now sidelined, a historical footnote in the grand narrative of Spain's colonial exploits. By the time Cortés returned to Mexico in 1530, his power had waned, much like the once mighty Aztec empire he had toppled. He spent his later years on the fringes of politics, dabbling in exploration and trying to reclaim his former glories. He even embarked on an ill-fated expedition to Honduras, a venture that proved more costly than fruitful. It was a far cry from his earlier triumphs, and perhaps a reminder that not all adventures end in gold and glory. The economic realities of colonialism were harsh, and Cortés's wealth dwindled amidst legal battles and mounting debts. In a twist of irony, the man who had once gambled on the riches of the New World found himself financially strapped. He died in 1547, aged 62, in relative obscurity, far from the lands he had conquered and the courts where he had once held sway. So, what are we to make of Hernán Cortés? A hero, a villain, or something in between? His legacy is a patchwork quilt of myth and reality, stitched together by the threads of ambition, brutality, and opportunism. The romanticized image of the dashing conquistador clashes with the harsh truths of colonial exploitation and cultural destruction. Cortés was both a product and a shaper of his time, a man whose actions echoed far beyond his own life. In the grand sweep of history, Cortés's conquests reshaped the Americas, setting the stage for centuries of Spanish rule. The fall of the Aztec Empire marked the beginning of a new era, one characterized by cultural fusion, economic exploitation, and profound social upheaval. The Spanish colonial system, built on the ashes of indigenous civilizations, laid the groundwork for the modern nations of Latin America. But let's not sugarcoat it. The legacy of Cortés is as double-edged as his sword. While he brought European innovations and ideas to the New World, he also unleashed a wave of violence, disease, and displacement that decimated indigenous populations. Contemporary views judge his exploits with a more critical eye, highlighting the darker chapters of his story that were once glossed over in favor of grandiose tales of discovery and conquest. And now, for a touch of humor in this otherwise sobering narrative. Imagine if Hernán Cortés had just stuck to law school. Picture him in a courtroom, charming the judge with his eloquence and navigating legal loopholes with the same deftness he once applied to military strategy. Perhaps history would have been kinder to him, and the Aztecs might have been spared the cataclysmic upheaval that followed his arrival. But alas, the allure of adventure and the promise of untold riches proved too tempting for a young man who preferred the thrill of conquest to the tedium of legal texts. So, as we wrap up the saga of Hernán Cortés, remember this. History is not just a collection of names and dates, but a complex tapestry of human experiences, shaped by ambition, circumstance, and the inexorable march of time. Cortés's story is one of triumph and tragedy, a testament to the power of individual agency and the unpredictable consequences of human actions. And while we may never fully reconcile the myth with the reality, we can appreciate the lessons his life offers. A reminder that even the most storied figures of history were, at their core, human, with all the flaws and contradictions that come with the territory. In the chill of a Warsaw winter, a young girl named Maria Skłodowska was busy rewriting the script of her own destiny, armed with little more than a fierce brain and a hefty dose of chutzpah. Born in 1867, she lived in a Poland under the thumb of the Russian Empire, where the idea of a woman pursuing higher education was about as welcome as a snowstorm in May. Yet, this didn't stop Maria. No, sir. She was the kind of kid who'd sneak books under her covers at night, reading by candlelight, dreaming of a world where knowledge was the currency of the realm. Now, we're not talking about a girl with just a casual interest in science here. Maria was as serious as a heart attack about learning. Her family supported her intellectual curiosity despite their own financial hardships. Her father, W. Ladislaw, a school teacher by profession, lost his job for his Polish nationalist sympathies, which was about as politically savvy as waving a red flag in front of a bull. Even in such precarious conditions, the Skłodowskis made education their family's North Star. They had to, really, considering the alternative was the intellectual equivalent of a black hole. Maria's early education started at a gymnasium for girls, a school that was more about churning out proper ladies than fostering future Nobel laureates. But here's the twist. Maria wasn't just any student. She graduated first in her class at the tender age of 15, which would make you think she was destined for academic stardom. But hold your applause. At that time, universities in Poland were about as open to women as a locked vault. The reality for many women was a lifetime of domesticity, not degrees. Enter the clandestine, flying university, a secret institution that defied the Russian-imposed ban on higher education for women. Imagine a university without a campus, without a registrar's office, and certainly without any shiny brochures. It was a covert operation that changed locations as often as a spy on the run, offering courses in Polish history, philosophy, and science. And yes, Maria enrolled, because why not mix a little academic pursuit with a dash of danger? The flying university was where Maria's passion for science truly took flight. The conditions were far from glamorous. Picture this. Rickety tables in dimly lit rooms, with students huddled together like conspirators. But it worked. It was here that Maria got her first taste of laboratory work, a messy affair in makeshift labs with equipment that looked like it had been cobbled together by MacGyver. Imagine trying to conduct an experiment with apparatus held together by sheer willpower and a bit of string. These less-than-ideal conditions didn't deter Maria. If anything, they added a layer of grit to her determination. After all, when you start your academic life dodging both literal and metaphorical landmines, you develop a certain resilience, a taste for academic rebellion, and a knack for working miracles with whatever's on hand. It's no wonder she later became the woman who handled radioactive materials with her bare hands. Though, to be fair, no one knew about the dangers of radiation back then. But that's a story for another time. Maria's pursuit of knowledge wasn't just about personal ambition. It was a way to honor her family, who had sacrificed so much for her education. Her sister Bronislawa, for instance, had gone to Paris to study medicine, a radical move that was like reaching for the moon. The plan was for Maria to support Bronislawa financially by working as a governess, and in return, Bronislawa would later help Maria with her own studies. This sisterly pact was a testament to their mutual determination to rise above societal constraints. During her stint as a governess, Maria didn't just twiddle her thumbs. She spent her free time educating herself in physics, chemistry, and math, poring over textbooks and conducting simple experiments. It was during this time that she fell in love, both with science and, quite literally, with a man named Kazimierz Zororsky, a mathematician whose family, unfortunately, deemed Maria an unsuitable match due to her lack of wealth. Ah, the classic tale of love thwarted by social status. But don't feel too bad for her. Maria had bigger fish to fry. The years spent as a governess were a blend of personal growth and profound frustration. Yet Maria never wavered in her determination to pursue her dreams. She saved every penny she earned, and when the time was right, she packed her bags and headed to Paris. It was 1891, and Maria was 24 years old. She enrolled at the Sorbonne, where she would eventually become Marie Curie, the woman who changed the face of science forever. But before she emerged as the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, Marie had to navigate a world that was as cold and unforgiving as a Warsaw winter. Her story is not just one of scientific achievement, but of grit, resilience, and an unyielding thirst for knowledge. It's a story of a woman who dared to defy the conventions of her time, one clandestine class at a time. And it's only just beginning. Marie Curie's journey to Paris was the kind of leap into the unknown that would make even the most daring adventurer pause. Swapping the familiar, if stifling, confines of Warsaw for the bustling boulevards of Paris was no small feat. It was 1891, and Paris was the epicenter of culture, art, and science, a vibrant tapestry woven with the threads of innovation and revolution. But let's not get too misty-eyed. For Marie, this move was less about sipping espresso at less due maggots, and more about how to stretch a franc to cover both rent and a meager diet. Once she arrived, Marie found herself faced with the reality that dreams don't pay the rent. She lived in a modest garret, a stone's throw from the Sorbonne, where the thin walls did little to keep out the Parisian winter chill. Forget central heating. Marie was lucky when the tiny stove in her room managed to warm more than just her hands. Her diet consisted mainly of bread and tea, a culinary choice more out of necessity than preference. You see, at that time, Marie's daily budget was roughly the cost of a baguette and a cup of tea, about 150 francs. That's not even enough for a croissant, folks. But let's debunk another myth while we're here. The romantic notion of the starving student idealistically braving hardship for education. While there's a kernel of truth, the reality was far grimmer. For Marie, hunger was a constant companion, and there were days she fainted in class due to sheer exhaustion and malnutrition. Yet she never missed a lecture. The Sorbonne, with its male-dominated classrooms and its air of intellectual elitism, was a battlefield, and Marie was determined to conquer it. The Sorbonne in the late 19th century wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet for women. In fact, it was more like a red tape labyrinth. Women were a rare sight. and Marie was one of only 23 female students in a sea of 1,825 male counterparts. If you think that sounds like a daunting ratio, you'd be right. The academic environment was about as welcoming to women as a porcupine at a balloon party. Yet, Marie's dedication to her studies was unyielding. She was often seen sitting at the back of the lecture halls, scribbling notes furiously, determined to absorb every bit of knowledge thrown her way. Marie wasn't just battling poverty and prejudice. She was also navigating the intricacies of a foreign language. Although she had learned French in Poland, the academic complexities of scientific jargon were a whole different ball game. But Marie didn't flinch. She not only adapted, she excelled. By 1893, she had earned her degree in physics, finishing first in her class. A year later, she added a mathematics degree to her arsenal, coming in second. Because why stop at one when you can have two? Financial struggles aside, Marie's time in Paris was marked by a fierce independence and a refusal to let societal norms dictate her path. She forged friendships with fellow students, those few who saw her as more than just a curiosity. And despite the isolation she sometimes felt, Marie found solace in the libraries of Paris, those grand sanctuaries of silence and knowledge. Now, let's talk about the myth of the lonely genius. While Marie was indeed a solitary figure at times, she was also deeply connected to her family. Her correspondence with her sister Bronislawa was a lifeline, a reminder of the support waiting for her back home. Bronislawa, now a doctor, was a testament to the power of their shared dreams. Marie's struggles in Paris were not just a personal battle, but a reflection of the broader social realities of the time. The restrictions placed on women in academia were symptomatic of a society that valued tradition over progress. But Marie, with her relentless pursuit of knowledge, was a harbinger of change. Her story in Paris is a testament to resilience in the face of adversity. It's about the grit required to sit in a drafty room, juggling equations, and the gnawing hunger in the pit of your stomach. It's about staring down a system designed to exclude you and saying, "Not today." Marie's time at the Sorbonne was not a romantic escapade, but a testament to her unyielding spirit and her refusal to be boxed in by the limitations of her time. And so, with 2 degrees in hand and a growing reputation as a formidable force in the scientific community, Marie was poised to take the next steps in her journey. She was about to meet someone who would not only change her life, but also help ignite a scientific revolution. But that part of her story, dear friends, is yet to unfold. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the life of Marie Curie, a woman who dared to dream and whose legacy continues to illuminate the world. Marie Curie was on the cusp of a scientific revolution, and all she needed was the right partner in crime. Enter Pierre Curie, a physicist with a penchant for magnetism and a heart as big as the Eiffel Tower. The two met through a mutual friend in 1894, and it was a meeting of minds as much as hearts. Pierre was as enamored with Marie's intellect as he was with her resolve. Imagine 2 puzzle pieces clicking together, a partnership that would change not only their lives, but the fabric of science itself. Now, let's not romanticize this too much. Their early days together weren't a montage of candlelit dinners and leisurely strolls along the Seine. They were more likely to be found hunched over a lab table, sleeves rolled up, debating the intricacies of physics. When they married in 1895, Marie wore a dark blue outfit rather than a traditional white wedding dress. This wasn't an eccentric fashion choice. It was practicality at its finest. That same outfit doubled as her lab uniform. Talk about a dual-purpose wardrobe. Marie was about to carve her name into the annals of science, and it all started with a scrap heap of a lab. Their working space wasn't exactly state-of-the-art. Think less cutting-edge research facility and more abandoned warehouse chic. The lab was a repurposed shed in the courtyard of the School of Physics and Chemistry in Paris. It had a leaky roof and creaky floors that seemed to groan under the weight of their ambitions. But hey, who needs opulent labs when you've got a mission, right? The Curies embarked on the research of a lifetime in this less-than-glamorous setting. Marie became fascinated with a phenomenon that had recently been discovered by Henry Becquerel. Certain materials emitted mysterious rays capable of fogging photographic plates. Marie hypothesized that these rays were not the result of some chemical reaction, but were intrinsic to the atoms themselves. It was groundbreaking stuff, and the term radioactivity, a word Marie herself coined in 1898, was about to enter the lexicon of science. Here's a myth that's worth debunking: the image of the Curies as lone geniuses toiling away in isolation. Sure, they were dedicated, but they weren't hermits. Their work was part of a larger scientific community pushing the boundaries of what was known. However, the Curies did have a unique approach. Their method was, shall we say, hands-on. Marie once described her work as a manual labor, and she wasn't exaggerating. Extracting radium, the element she would later isolate, was no small feat. The process involved sifting through tons, yes, tons, of pitchblende, a uranium-rich mineral. It was chemistry meets weightlifting. If you're imagining a scene out of a mad scientist's lab, you're not far off. The Curies boiled, evaporated, and distilled the pitchblende in massive cauldrons. They had no protective gear, no fume hoods, just sheer determination, and perhaps a dash of obliviousness to the potential dangers. The lab was filled with the acrid scent of chemicals, and the air shimmered with particles no one yet knew were hazardous. Safety standards. Let's just say they weren't top of mind back then. But here's where it gets a bit darkly humorous. Despite the lab's shabby conditions, there was one perk: luminescence. The radioactive elements they were working with glowed softly in the dark. It was a bit like having your own personal nightlight, albeit one that could give you a nasty case of radiation sickness. Marie and Pierre would often carry samples around in their pockets, not realizing these glowing treasures were slowly damaging their health. It's the kind of irony that would be funny if it weren't so tragic. Economic realities added another layer of challenge. Funding was scarce, and the Curies often paid for materials out of their own pockets. The French government wasn't exactly throwing money at research that seemed, at the time, as esoteric as it was groundbreaking. The couple had to make do with what they had, stretching resources like a chef trying to make a 5-course meal out of scraps. Yet, their persistence paid off. By 1902, they had isolated a decigram of pure radium chloride, an achievement as monumental as it was exhausting. The discovery of radium and polonium, named after Marie's homeland, Poland, was more than just a scientific breakthrough. It was a paradigm shift. Their findings challenged the existing notions of matter and energy, laying the groundwork for modern physics and chemistry. These discoveries would later lead to advances in medical treatments, industrial applications, and even the development of nuclear energy. Not bad for a couple working in a glorified garden shed. But let's not sugarcoat the toll this work took. Marie and Pierre were often exhausted, their health compromised by the very elements they were bringing to light. The physical and mental demands were enormous, yet they soldiered on, driven by a passion that outshone even the luminescent materials they studied. The Curies were trailblazers, but not without cost. Their research attracted widespread attention, and in 1903 they were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics, alongside Henry Becquerel. Marie became the first woman to receive this prestigious award, a monumental achievement that shattered glass ceilings long before that metaphor was widely used. The prize money relieved some financial pressure, allowing them to continue their work with slightly less existential dread about paying the bills. However, the Curies weren't motivated by accolades or wealth. For them, the work was its own reward, a quest to unlock the secrets of the universe, one atom at a time. Their research was a labor of love, driven by curiosity and a relentless pursuit of knowledge. They were pioneers, navigating uncharted territory with nothing but their wits and a lot of elbow grease. As we wrap up this chapter of Marie Curie's story, it's clear that her journey was about more than just scientific discovery. It was about breaking barriers and challenging the status quo, all while dealing with the chaotic realities of life and work. Marie and Pierre's partnership was a testament to the power of collaboration and shared vision. Their story is far from over, and there are more twists and turns to explore. So stay tuned as we continue to unravel the life and legacy of a woman who dared to redefine what was possible. As we slide into this next chapter of Marie Curie's life, let's keep our eyes on the prize, specifically the Nobel Prizes. The year was 1903, and Marie Curie had just become the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in physics, alongside her husband Pierre and Henry Becquerel. If you're picturing a grand celebration with champagne toasts and ticker-tape parades, hold that thought. The reality was a bit more complicated, like realizing your surprise birthday party is also a surprise intervention. The Nobel Prize was a game-changer, no doubt about it. It offered the Curies a level of recognition that could open doors previously barred by the heavy bolts of sexism and skepticism. But it wasn't all roses and accolades. Marie was thrust into a spotlight that was as unwelcome as it was unexpected. Imagine being handed a megaphone when all you wanted was a quiet corner to keep working. In the early 1900s, the scientific community was more of a gentleman's club, and Marie's entrance was like a woman crashing a poker night. No one was quite sure how to handle it. Let's talk about the financial windfall. The prize money was 150,782 francs, a substantial sum that could finally ease the Curies' economic struggles. For context, a skilled worker in France at the time might earn 3,000 francs a year. Suddenly, the Curies could afford more than just baguettes and tea. They could actually fund their research without worrying if they'd have to pawn Pierre's prized magnet collection. Yet money wasn't the only currency at play here. The prize brought with it a new level of scrutiny and expectation. The scientific community, always a bit of a boys' club, had its fair share of skeptics. Some questioned whether Marie's contributions were truly her own, or if Pierre was the real genius pulling the strings. The classic, behind every great man trope, rearing its ugly head. If anything, Marie's resolve only steeled further, determined to prove not just her brilliance, but her independence. Let's pivot to 1911, a year that would add another feather to Marie's already impressive cap. This time, she snagged the Nobel Prize in chemistry for her discovery of radium and polonium. Solo. That's right, folks. No husband, no Becquerel, just Marie Curie and her indomitable will. This made her the first person, male or female, to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences. Talk about setting the bar so high it might as well be on the moon. But before you start clapping, let's throw a little reality check into the mix. 1911 wasn't just a year of triumph for Marie. It was also a year rife with scandal. Enter Paul Langevin, a physicist and a former student of Pierre's. The two shared an intellectual camaraderie that eventually blossomed into a full-blown affair. And just like that, Marie found herself caught in a media maelstrom that would make today's tabloid headlines look like nursery rhymes. The Langevin affair was the kind of scandal that sold newspapers faster than hotcakes at a county fair. Paul was married, and Marie was branded a homewrecker, a foreign temptress who had seduced a good Frenchman. The xenophobia was as palpable as the ink on the page, and the fallout was brutal. Marie, who had once been the toast of the scientific world, found herself vilified, her reputation dragged through the Parisian mud. Yet, here's where Marie's story takes a turn that would make even the most hardened skeptic nod in admiration. She faced the scandal with a mix of grace and defiance. She didn't retreat into obscurity or flee to some secluded retreat. Instead, she doubled down on her work, using it as both shield and sword against the slings and arrows of public opinion. The irony was as thick as the tension at a family dinner with uninvited in-laws. While the world was busy dissecting her personal life, Marie remained focused on her research. She was a scientist, after all, not a celebrity. Her lab became her sanctuary, a place where the equations were as constant as the criticism was fleeting. It's a testament to her resilience that she continued to push scientific boundaries even as society tried to box her in. Let's not forget the economic context of this time. The early 20th century was a period of upheaval and transformation. France was navigating the choppy waters of industrialization and the world was on the brink of the Great War. In this landscape, science was both a beacon of hope and a source of tension. Marie's work on radioactivity had implications far beyond the lab, promising advancements in medicine while also hinting at the destructive potential of nuclear energy. And here's a kicker for you. The very elements that had brought Marie acclaim were also contributing to her physical decline. Radium and polonium, the glowing jewels of her research, were wreaking havoc on her health. The irony is almost Shakespearean. She was being undone by the very discoveries that had made her a legend. But Marie wasn't one for self-pity. She was too busy looking forward, always on the cusp of the next discovery. Her journey was about more than personal accolades. It was a quest to expand the horizons of human knowledge, to illuminate the dark corners of ignorance with the light of scientific inquiry. As we pause here, remember this. Marie Curie's story is not just about the triumphs and scandals. It's about a woman who refused to let society define her, who met every challenge with the kind of tenacity that could outshine even the most luminous of her discoveries. Her narrative is one of complexity, of a life lived on her own terms, with a legacy that continues to inspire. And we're not done yet. There's more to explore in this extraordinary tale of science, scandal, and sheer, unadulterated grit. Stay tuned. As the dust settled from the swirling scandal, and Marie Curie's name reclaimed its rightful place in the annals of scientific greatness, the world found itself on the brink of chaos. It was 1914, and the first shots of World War I had been fired, plunging Europe into a conflict that would demand not just soldiers and strategies, but also the ingenuity of scientists. Enter Marie, once again stepping into the breach with her characteristic blend of audacity and innovation. While many saw the war as a theater of destruction, Marie saw an opportunity for science to serve humanity in its darkest hour. Her brainchild, the Little Curies, not a band of pint-sized scientists, but rather mobile radiography units designed to bring X-ray technology to the battlefront. Picture this: a fleet of 20 vehicles, each equipped with an X-ray machine, a dynamo to generate electricity, and a fearless operator ready to assist in saving lives. These rolling medical marvels were the first of their kind, a fusion of automotive and medical technology that could be seen as the precursor to the modern-day medical van. Let's dive into the nuts and bolts, literally. The Little Curies were essentially ordinary vehicles retrofitted with X-ray equipment. Their engines powered the machines, turning the destructive potential of the internal combustion engine into a life-saving force on the battlefield. Marie personally trained 150 women to operate these units, teaching them not just the mechanics of the machines, but also basic medical procedures. It's a testament to her pioneering spirit that she was able to transform a motley crew of volunteers into a corps of radiological angels. And because we're all about debunking myths here, let's tackle the idea of Marie as a lone genius, tirelessly toiling away. The truth is, she had help, lots of it. Her daughter Ian, who would later win her own Nobel Prize, was right there beside her, learning the ropes and sharing the burden. Together, they braved the front lines, a mother-daughter duo armed with science and an unwavering commitment to saving lives. The economic context of this period added another layer of complexity. France, like much of Europe, was grappling with wartime shortages and economic strain. Funding for such an ambitious project wasn't exactly pouring in like champagne at a Parisian soirée. Yet, Marie, ever the resourceful scientist, managed to secure donations and support from various quarters, including the French Red Cross. Her ability to rally resources in a time of scarcity was nothing short of miraculous, akin to a wartime MacGyver with a Geiger counter. As the war dragged on, the Little Curies became an indispensable part of the Allied medical effort. They were responsible for conducting over 1 million X-ray examinations, a staggering figure that underscores their impact. The units helped doctors locate bullets and shrapnel with unprecedented accuracy, reducing the need for exploratory surgery and significantly increasing the survival rates of wounded soldiers. It's no exaggeration to say that these mobile units changed the course of battlefield medicine, setting a precedent for future medical innovations. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the myth of Marie Curie as an untouchable legend, a figure so lofty she seems almost otherworldly. The reality, as always, is more nuanced. Marie was a woman of flesh and blood, with all the frailties and foibles that come with it. She wasn't some detached deity dispensing scientific wisdom from on high. She was a mother, a widow, a scientist, and yes, a flawed human being who faced her fair share of doubts and dilemmas. Her legacy, however, is undeniable. Marie Curie's contributions to science are akin to a comet blazing across the sky, leaving a trail of brilliance that continues to illuminate the path for generations. She shattered the glass ceilings of her time with such force that the echoes are still reverberating through the halls of academia today. The myth, while romantic, pales in comparison to the reality of her achievements, a reality built on grit, determination, and an unwavering belief in the power of science to change the world. Fast forward to today, and Marie's influence is woven into the very fabric of modern science. Her pioneering work on radioactivity laid the foundation for fields as diverse as nuclear medicine, radiation therapy, and even our understanding of the atomic structure. The medical technologies she helped develop have evolved into sophisticated diagnostic tools that save countless lives every day. And let's not forget her role as a trailblazer for women in science, a beacon of possibility for those who dare to defy the constraints of their era. In the end, Marie Curie's story is one of transformation, of turning adversity into opportunity, of crafting a legacy that transcends time and place. She was a scientist who dared to dream beyond the confines of her lab, a woman who wove the threads of curiosity and courage into a tapestry of discovery. Her life may have been marked by scandal and sacrifice, but it was also a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. So, as we wrap up this exploration of Marie Curie's extraordinary life, let's take a moment to reflect on what she taught us. In an age of division and discord, her story reminds us that science is a unifying force, a language that transcends borders and boundaries. It's a call to action for all of us to embrace the unknown, to push the limits of what we think is possible, and to shine a light into the darkest corners of ignorance. Marie Curie once said, "Nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood." As we continue to navigate the complexities of our modern world, her words resonate as a rallying cry for curiosity, courage, and compassion. Her legacy lives on in every lab, every classroom, and every heart that beats with the rhythm of discovery. And that, dear friends, is a legacy worth celebrating. The year 1350. Where waking up at 2 a.m. isn't just a regrettable life choice, but a mandatory duty for you, the dedicated medieval baker. The rooster's still snoozing, but you're already up, rubbing the sleep from your eyes and stoking that wood-fired oven, the heart of your bakery. This oven is like a grumpy beast that needs attention long before the sun even thinks about rising. Why so early? Because bread, my friend, is the medieval equivalent of Wi-Fi. Essential and omnipresent, accounting for up to a whopping 80% of daily calories for the average Jane or John Doe of the Middle Ages. Forget the keto diet. Back then, it was all about the carbs. Now, let's talk economics, because bread wasn't just food, it was practically a currency. Prices weren't left to the whims of supply and demand like your modern grocery store. Nope, local authorities regulated them. Picture a medieval council, the economic overlords, setting the price of your daily loaf. It's like having a government-sanctioned Uber surge pricing. This control was serious business because bread was life. Without it, riots could erupt faster than you can say, artisan sourdough. This regulation might sound like a recipe for disaster or a communist utopia, depending on your viewpoint, but it was actually crucial. The bread price cap ensured even the poorest folks could afford their daily caloric intake. And as a baker, your role was crucial too. You weren't just any tradesman, you were a provider of sustenance, a pillar of society. People relied on you more than the town crier's morning gossip. But let's not romanticize your role too much. There was a gritty reality to ensuring the town had its daily bread. Your day began in the dead of night, and while the rest of the town dreamed, you were grappling with flour sacks and firewood. And oh, the joys of medieval hygiene. Flour dust clung to everything like a needy toddler, and sanitation was more of an abstract concept than a daily practice. By the time the sun hinted at rising, your bakery was already bustling. Flour-dusted apprentices scurried around like medieval minions, kneading dough with hands that were probably cleaner than most, thanks to constant immersion in flour and water. Meanwhile, you, the maestro of this carbohydrate opera, ensured the loaves were perfectly golden and, more importantly, plentiful. Because running out of bread wasn't just a business faux pas, it was a potential disaster in the making. And let's not forget the sheer physicality of it all. This wasn't just tossing some ingredients in a bread machine and hitting start. You lifted, mixed, and shaped every loaf by hand. Your arms were the medieval equivalent of a gym membership, and that was just the morning workout. As the town awoke, your bakery became a hub of activity. Customers filed in, clutching their coin, each one a small economic interaction in the grander scheme of medieval life. Prices were held steady by the assize of bread and ale, a set of regulations that had been in place since the 13th century, ensuring your bread was not only affordable, but met certain quality standards. It was the USDA of its time, minus the food pyramid. In this bustling scene, you were more than a baker, you were a societal anchor. People depended on you to keep their bellies full and tempers calm. Bread riots were not unheard of, and the last thing you wanted was to be the spark that ignited one. Your work was a balancing act, ensuring you had enough loaves to meet demand without breaking the bank or the law. As you strolled through your morning chores, you couldn't help but chuckle at the idea of modern folks complaining about early meetings. You were the original early bird, and the worm, in this case, was the satisfaction of a well-fed community. And though the work was tough, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing you played a central role in the rhythm of daily life. Bread was more than food. It was culture, economy, and survival all rolled into one. So here you are, in the thick of it, with the scent of fresh bread wafting through the air, a testament to your toil and skill. The town is waking up, relying on you to fill their bellies and fuel their day. It's a hard-knock life, sure, but it's also one that keeps the world turning, one loaf at a time. And speaking of turning the world with each loaf, let's talk about how you even got the flour to feed your medieval bakery beast. Because it's not like you could just pop over to Whole Foods with a reusable tote. No, securing grain was a logistical nightmare that would give a modern supply chain manager a stress-induced eye twitch. First, let's follow the journey of the humble grain. Your wheat started its life on a local farm, probably no more than a donkey's trot away, since transportation meant hooves, not horsepower. These farms weren't the endless fields of golden waves you might picture from a painting. Think smaller plots, tilled by families who knew that every kernel counted. You see, back in the 14th century, farms were more like subsistence gardens rather than sprawling agribusinesses. The average medieval farm was about 20 acres, give or take, and growing enough wheat to feed a community was no small feat. Once harvested, your wheat needed to reach the miller. And oh, the miller, a middleman with power that would make a modern influencer blush. Millers were the gatekeepers of flour, and they didn't just provide a service, they took a toll. Literally. These guys could charge up to a third of the grain as payment. Imagine tossing a third of your paycheck to the bank just for cashing it. But that's the price you paid, because milling grain by hand was about as fun as watching paint dry, and not nearly as productive. Millers, with their wind or water-powered mills, turned grain into the flour that was the lifeblood of your bakery. This was no easy process, mind you. Milling was a grind in every sense. Those massive millstones didn't turn themselves, and the precision needed to get the right grind without burning the flour was an art form. If the miller messed up, your bread could end up tasting like, well, burnt toast. And nobody wants to be the baker known for selling loaves with the flavor profile of a charcoal briquette. Now, let's debunk some myths about medieval markets. Forget the quaint images of bustling stalls with neatly arranged goods. Medieval markets were more like a chaotic bazaar with a side of rugby scrum. Picture Black Friday, but with less personal space and more livestock underfoot. These markets were the medieval version of Amazon Prime Day, minus the click-and-ship convenience. You had to haggle, shout, and sometimes elbow your way through the throngs just to secure your supplies. Supply and demand were volatile, and prices could swing faster than a knight's sword in battle. The market was a cacophony of yelling vendors, bleating sheep, and the occasional brawl over a particularly nice sack of barley. It was survival of the fittest, or at least the loudest. And amidst this chaos, you had to source not just wheat, but salt, yeast, and whatever else you needed to keep your bakery running smoothly. The economic context here is critical. Markets were not just about shopping. They were the heartbeat of medieval towns, a place where news spread faster than the plague and alliances were as temporary as the weather forecast. Political machinations and social dynamics played out in plain view, and as a baker, you were smack in the middle of this whirlwind. Your ability to navigate these waters determined whether you thrived or merely survived. And let's not gloss over the fact that all this hustle and bustle was happening under the watchful eye of local authorities. Price controls and quality checks were the order of the day. The assize of bread and ale didn't just ensure your bread was affordable. It kept unscrupulous bakers from skimping on ingredients or quality. So even as you navigated the market madness, you also had to keep one eye on the law, ensuring your bread met the stringent standards set by those economic overlords we talked about. In all this, the myth of the idyllic medieval market fades into the reality of a bustling, sometimes brutal, economic engine. Yet there was a certain charm to the chaos, a vibrancy that modern supermarkets, with their sterile aisles and muzak, can't quite capture. This was the beating heart of medieval life, raw and unfiltered. And as you hauled your precious ingredients back to the bakery, you knew that despite the challenges, you were part of something vital, a community sustained by your hard work and the bread you baked. So there you have it, the grain-to-bread journey, a medieval supply chain saga that would make any modern logistics expert appreciate the wonders of technology. And yet, despite the challenges and chaos, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that every loaf you baked was a testament to not just your skill, but to the entire, intricate web of medieval life. And as the sun set over the town, with the scent of freshly baked bread lingering in the air, you could rest easy, knowing that tomorrow you'd do it all over again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the cobbled streets, the air was thick with the aroma of freshly baked bread mingling with the earthy scent of wood smoke. This was your world, a sensory symphony that signaled the end of another grueling, yet satisfying, day. But before you could kick back and enjoy your medieval version of Netflix, which was basically watching the town drunk stumble home, let's dive into the heart of it all, the baking process itself. After all, this is where the magic happened. Now, forget everything you know about modern baking with its precise digital scales and ovens that practically bake the bread for you. Back in 1350, you were working with a medieval toolkit that would make a modern baker break into a cold sweat. For starters, you didn't have those handy packets of instant yeast. Nope, you relied on natural yeasts, which were as predictable as an English summer. This wild yeast came from the environment, clinging to grains and floating in the air, just waiting to be coaxed into action. The process kicked off with a sourdough starter, your precious Petri dish of flour and water left to ferment in a corner of the bakery. This bubbly concoction was your leavening agent, the unsung hero that gave your bread its rise and distinctive tang. Maintaining it was akin to looking after a pet. You had to feed it, nurture it, and hope it didn't die on you. If it did, well, you were out of luck and out of loaves. When it came to the actual baking, the absence of modern ovens meant you relied on a wood-fired behemoth that was more temperamental than a cat on bath day. You'd spend hours heating it up, shoving in logs until the stone interior was searing hot. Then you'd clear out the ash and let the residual heat do the actual baking. It was a delicate dance, too hot, and you'd end up with blackened bricks, too cool, and you'd have more dough than bread. Bread types were where the social ladder was most evident. The humble Maslin bread, a rough and ready mix of wheat and rye, was the staple of the lower classes. It was dense and hearty, the medieval equivalent of a budget meal deal. On the other hand, the luxurious manchet, made from fine white wheat flour, was the bread of choice for the aristocracy. Light, airy, and as pretentious as a modern artisanal loaf, it was a status symbol baked into a crust. But let's not sugarcoat it. Baking in the Middle Ages came with a side of danger that could give any baker nightmares. Enter ergot, a fungus that loved to hitch a ride on rye. It was the original bad trip, causing hallucinations, gangrene, and even death. If you accidentally served up a batch of ergot-infested loaves, you could find yourself in a world of trouble faster than you can say witch hunt. Literally. Some historians speculate that ergot poisoning might have even contributed to the hysteria of witch trials. Talk about a baking faux pas. Despite these hurdles, baking was an art form, a blend of science and intuition honed through years of experience. You had to know your dough, how it felt, how it smelled, and adjust your technique on the fly. It was less about following a recipe and more about having a sixth sense for what the dough needed. A pinch of salt here, a splash of water there, and a prayer to the bread gods that everything turned out right. And let's not forget the economic implications of your daily grind. Bread wasn't just sustenance, it was a currency of sorts. The weight and price of your loaves were governed by the aforementioned assize of bread and ale, which meant any deviation could result in fines or worse. You were walking a tightrope, balancing quality and quantity, while ensuring you didn't end up on the wrong side of the law. In this world of medieval baking, precision was a luxury you couldn't afford, yet somehow you made it work. You were part of an intricate web that sustained the town, one loaf at a time. Every morning, as the sun rose and the townsfolk gathered to buy their daily bread, your work was on display, a testament to your skill and resilience. The bread you baked was more than just food. It was a lifeline, a cornerstone of daily life that kept the community nourished, and more importantly, at peace. So, as you closed up shop for the night, looking forward to a few hours of rest before the cycle began anew, you could take a moment to appreciate your role in this grand tapestry. You were the alchemist of the bakery, transforming humble ingredients into the sustenance that kept the wheels of the medieval world turning. And though the work was hard and the rewards modest, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that you were indispensable to the rhythm of the town. And there you have it, the gritty, fascinating world of medieval baking, where each loaf was a small miracle of science and skill. But don't get too comfortable, because there's still more to uncover about your life as a baker in this bustling, chaotic era. We've got more layers to peel back, like the flaky crust of a perfectly baked manchet. Stay tuned, because the story doesn't end here. As you rest your weary bones and prepare for another early morning, let's take a deeper dive into the social and political fabric of medieval baking. A world where bread could be as explosive as gunpowder and bakers walked a fine line between hero and villain. Strap in, because this ride is anything but smooth. First off, let's debunk the notion of the jolly baker, all smiles and flour-dusted aprons. In reality, the world of medieval commerce was more cutthroat than a Game of Thrones episode. Your role as a baker was double-edged. You fed the town, sure, but you also shouldered the blame when bellies went empty. The assize of bread and ale wasn't just a quaint regulation. It was the law of the land, and flouting it could land you in hot water, or worse, hot oil. Yeah, we're talking about the dreaded pillory, a wooden frame that made public humiliation an art form. Short-changing your customers on loaf weight could earn you a one-way ticket to this medieval PR nightmare. Now, why were these regulations so harsh? Because bread wasn't just food, it was a political tool. Cities relied on bakers to keep the peace, quite literally. A well-fed populace was a docile one, and any disruption in the bread supply could lead to chaos faster than you can say, let them eat cake. A phrase that, by the way, Marie Antoinette likely never uttered, but it captures the mood perfectly. Speaking of chaos, let's talk about bread riots. These weren't your average town hall meetings gone awry. Consider the London bread riots of 1258, when famine and high prices led to a full-blown uprising. Angry mobs, armed with nothing but righteous indignation and whatever blunt objects they could find, took to the streets demanding affordable bread. These weren't polite protests. They were medieval flash mobs with a penchant for property damage. And you, as the town baker, were right in the thick of it, caught between the rock of angry customers and the hard place of the authorities who demanded compliance. But let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. The political landscape of medieval Europe was like a chessboard where bakers were the pawns. Sure, knights and lords got the glory, but without bread, armies wouldn't march and kingdoms wouldn't stand. Take the 100 Years' War, for example. Armies needed to be fed, and bread was the cornerstone of a soldier's diet. Your loaves kept the troops fueled, turning you into an unsung hero of the battlefield logistics, even if you never set foot on the front lines. And speaking of hierarchy, let's not sugarcoat your position in the social pecking order. Despite your essential role, bakers were often seen as lower on the medieval totem pole. You weren't a noble, a knight, or even a wealthy merchant. You were a craftsman, and while your skills were respected, you didn't hold much sway in the grand scheme of things. Your life was a daily grind, literally, and your success relied on the whims of the market, the quality of the harvest, and the stability of the political climate. But let's not wallow in pity. There was a certain gritty pride in being a baker. You were part of a community, a vital cog in the machine of medieval life. Your bread wasn't just sustenance. It was a symbol of stability in a world that was often anything but stable. And while you might not have climbed the social ladder, you held a unique position that few could challenge. Now, let's address the elephant in the medieval room, the notion of the honest baker. In a world where life was tough and competition fiercer than a joust at high noon, not every baker played by the rules. Adulteration was rampant. Some bakers would sneak cheaper grains or fillers like sawdust into their dough to stretch their profits. The penalties for these culinary sins were severe, but the lure of extra coin was too tempting for some, leading to a cat-and-mouse game with local officials. So what kept you, the honest baker, on the straight and narrow? Well, aside from the fear of public shaming or worse, there was a personal code of honor. You took pride in your craft, in feeding your community with loaves that were not just nourishing, but also honest. You understood that your reputation was your most valuable asset, one that couldn't be bought or easily repaired if tarnished. As we close out this chapter of medieval baking lore, remember that while the world you inhabited was challenging, it was also richly rewarding. You navigated a complex web of social, economic, and political forces with a steady hand and a keen eye, ensuring that the community you served could rely on you day in and day out. So, as you drift off to sleep, remember that in the grand tapestry of history, you were more than just a baker. You were a provider, a peacekeeper, and perhaps most importantly, a vital link in the chain of medieval life. And as dawn approaches, ready to herald another day of baking adventures, brace yourself for more tales of toil and triumph in the bustling world of medieval commerce. There's still much to uncover as we peel back the layers of history, one crusty loaf at a time. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. As the sun peeks over the horizon, ready to invite another day into the bustling world of medieval commerce, you can't help but ponder the broader strokes of your life as a baker. It's a life steeped in dough and determination, a microcosm of the economic and social fabric that weaves through the Middle Ages. Bread, after all, isn't just survival. It's the yeast that raises the loaf of history itself. Let's zoom out and consider the mammoth impact you and your fellow bakers have on society. It's not just the loaves you knead into existence, it's what they represent. Bread is the glue holding this medieval tapestry together, an edible testament to the socio-economic dance of the era. The daily grind, pun intended, of producing bread reflects the very essence of medieval life. communal, regulated, and at times brutally pragmatic. Your role as a baker is a linchpin in this grand scheme. It's a stark reminder that while knights and kings may dazzle in the historical spotlight, it's the everyday artisans and labourers who keep the machine running. Your humble bakery is a hive of economic activity, a place where coin changes hands and community bonds are needed anew with each loaf. And while the assize of bread and ale might seem like draconian oversight, it underscores how critical your craft is to maintaining social balance. Bread riots, while dramatic and disruptive, underscore the delicate equilibrium you maintain. One slip, one day without your loaves, could spark unrest faster than a minstrel's gossip. But let's take a step into the future, because the story of bread doesn't stop in the dusty streets of 1350. Fast forward through the centuries and witness the Industrial Revolution, a whirlwind of gears and steam that transforms the world, including the way we bake. Picture it. The year is 1837, and the steam-powered mill has just arrived, grinding more grain in a day than a medieval miller could in a month. This isn't just a technological leap. It's a seismic shift in production and consumption patterns. The Industrial Revolution reshapes everything, from the way you source ingredients to how loaves are baked. In the blink of a historical eye, bread moves from artisanal craft to mass-produced staple. The first mechanized bread slicer appears in 1928, giving birth to the phrase, "the best thing since sliced bread." It's a revolution not just in convenience, but in accessibility, bringing bread to the masses in a way that even the most egalitarian medieval market couldn't dream of. However, in this rush towards mechanization, something intangible is lost. An artisan's touch, the community interaction, the nuances of a baker's intuition honed over years. Gone are the wood-fired ovens, replaced by electric giants. The sourdough starter, once a prized possession, is sidelined by commercial yeast. Bread becomes a commodity, stripped of its narrative, its connection to the hands that craft it. Yet, not all traditions are consigned to history's compost bin. The artisanal bread movement of the late 20th century breathes new life into old techniques. Suddenly, sourdough is back in vogue, with its tangy flavor and crunchy crust celebrated once more. The handcrafted loaf becomes a symbol of authenticity, a nod to the past in a world obsessed with speed and efficiency. It's a delicious irony that as modern life accelerates, we crave the slow, deliberate processes of yesteryear. So, what lessons do we glean from this flower-dusted journey through time? For starters, the story of bread is one of resilience and reinvention. It reflects humanity's ability to adapt, to innovate, and yet to hold on to traditions that ground us. Bakers, from medieval artisans to modern craftsmen, have shaped society as much as any monarch or warrior. Your medieval bakery, with its crackling fire and bustling energy, was a cornerstone of community life. It's a legacy that persists, albeit in a different form, reminding us that while methods may change, the heart of the craft endures. As you wrap up your day, ready to lay your weary bones to rest, take a moment to appreciate the intricate web of history you've been part of. You've fed not just bodies, but hopes and dreams, keeping the wheels of society turning, one loaf at a time. In this grand tapestry of human endeavor, your role might seem small, but it's vital, because in the end, bread isn't just a staple. It's a story baked fresh each day, and that, dear baker, is a legacy richer than any king's feast. Underneath the blazing sun of Porbandar in 1869, where camels outnumbered cars by a mile, a boy named Mohandas, Karamchand, Gandhi was busy plotting his next caper. He might be a global icon now, but let's rewind to when he was just a scrawny kid with a penchant for mischief and a future that probably seemed as uncertain as the British weather he would later experience. You see, young Gandhi wasn't always the serene figure of peace we know today. Back then, he was more likely to be found pulling a prank than pondering philosophical dilemmas. As a student, Gandhi was about as rebellious as a wet noodle. In fact, he was a self-confessed coward, terrified of the dark, ghosts, and his school principal's cane. His report cards weren't exactly framed for posterity either. He was a pretty average student. Yet, even in those early days, the seeds of his future leadership were being sown. Between the giggles and the pranks, he was absorbing the world around him, learning about justice and fairness in a place where such concepts were as rare as a monsoon in the desert. Fast forward a few years, and it's time to trade the dusty streets of Porbandar for the bustling metropolis of London in 1888. At 18, Gandhi set sail for England, armed with a mission to study law and probably a suitcase filled with more cultural naivety than clothes. Upon arrival, he found that England was a different beast altogether. If his life were a movie, this would be the montage where the protagonist awkwardly navigates a new world, complete with quirky English customs and food that could make even the bravest of palates wrinkle. In England, Gandhi tried to fit in by adopting Western habits. He took to wearing expensive suits, as if a fancy outfit could somehow make the stiff upper lip of the British establishment more welcoming. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Despite his best efforts, cultural identity clung to him like an overly enthusiastic leech. However, this period was crucial. It taught him that true identity isn't something you can shake off with a change of clothes. It sticks with you, as permanent as ink on parchment. But the real crucible for Gandhi came not in London, but in the land of biltong and boerewors, South Africa. It was 1893 when Gandhi, now a freshly minted lawyer, accepted a case that required him to cross the Indian Ocean. Little did he know, this journey would be less about legal briefs and more about life-changing epiphanies. Upon arriving, Gandhi got a taste of racial injustice that would forever alter his course. At 24, he experienced a humiliating ejection from a first-class train carriage, despite holding a valid ticket. The year was 1893, and the scene unfolded in Pietermaritzburg, a name that would go down in history as the birthplace of his rebellion. Now, let's pause for a second. There's a popular myth that this single train ride was when Gandhi's heart switched from lawyer to leader overnight. But real life isn't a comic book, and Gandhi's transformation was more of a slow simmer than a sudden explosion. The incident was an important wake-up call, sure, but it was the countless, everyday indignities and institutionalized racism in South Africa that really fueled his fire. Gandhi spent 2 decades in South Africa, a place where the social hierarchy was about as rigid as the Queen's Guard. During those years, he developed his unique brand of activism, Satyagraha, or the force of truth. This wasn't just a catchy slogan. It was a philosophy that emphasized non-violent resistance and became the cornerstone of Gandhi's future campaigns. His approach was revolutionary, not just in the sense of political rebellion, but because it challenged the very notion of power and how it could be wielded. Throughout his time in South Africa, Gandhi organized strikes, led marches, and wrote pamphlets with the fervor of a man possessed. He wasn't just fighting against the British Empire's draconian laws. He was battling the apathy and fear that kept his fellow Indians subjugated. It was here that he honed the skills that would later make him a thorn in the side of the British Raj. By the time Gandhi left South Africa in 1915, he was no longer the timid lawyer who trembled at the thought of a courtroom audience. Instead, he had transformed into a leader who could inspire thousands with nothing more than his words and his unwavering belief in justice. And while his journey was far from over, these early experiences laid the groundwork for the monumental struggles and triumphs that awaited him back in India. Gandhi's story is a testament to the idea that sometimes the path to greatness is less about grand gestures and more about everyday courage. From the streets of Porbandar to the trains of South Africa, Gandhi's journey reminds us that change often starts with a single step, or, in his case, a single, fateful train ride. And so, with the South African chapter closed, our protagonist returns to India in 1915, a land where the British Empire's grip was as tight as a miser's wallet. Gandhi, now a seasoned activist with a toolkit of non-violent resistance, was thrust into a landscape that had more political potholes than a Delhi street after monsoon. He wasn't exactly welcomed with a ticker-tape parade. Instead, he arrived to find a nation teetering on the brink of its own awakening, as restless as a toddler after too much sugar. Gandhi's return was like stepping into a pressure cooker set to explode. World War I was in full swing, and the British, always the opportunists, had no qualms about drafting Indian soldiers to fight in a war that seemed as relevant to the average Indian farmer as an English tea party. The economic context was bleak. The British Raj had transformed India into a source of raw materials. Think of it as the empire's personal shopping cart. The peasantry was crushed under heavy taxes that felt as suffocating as a wool sweater in summer. Enter the Champaran and Kheder agitations, Gandhi's first major forays into the Indian political scene. Imagine Champaran in 1917, a district in Bihar where the indigo farmers were caught between a rock and a hard place, or more accurately, between British landlords and their own survival. The British had concocted a scheme as devious as a villain in a bad soap opera. Farmers were forced to grow indigo on a significant portion of their land, only to sell it at prices dictated by the landlords. The result: economic ruin for the farmers, who couldn't even grow enough food to feed their families. Gandhi's arrival in Champaran was met with a mix of hope and skepticism. Here was this man in a simple dhoti, more familiar with the courtrooms of South Africa than the fields of Bihar, promising liberation. His approach was anything but conventional. Forget the sword and shield. Gandhi wielded the pen and patience. He gathered evidence of the landlords' abuses, turning the spotlight on the injustices like a detective in a noir film. His method: engaging the masses, one conversation at a time, a strategy that would give even the most seasoned orator a run for their money. The Champaran agitation was a lesson in patience and persistence. Gandhi's strategy of non-violent resistance, or satyagraha, was put to the test. The result: the British were forced to concede, allowing the farmers more autonomy in what they grew. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless, a crack in the seemingly impenetrable facade of colonial power. Champaran proved that non-violent resistance was not just a philosophical ideal, but a practical strategy that could yield tangible results. And just when you thought Gandhi might take a breather, along came Kheder in 1918. Located in the heart of Gujarat, Kheder was experiencing a crop failure that left farmers on the brink of starvation. But the British were more concerned with their coffers than the cries of hungry farmers. They demanded taxes with the kind of insistence usually reserved for debt collectors. Gandhi stepped in, armed with his now trademark blend of non-violence and negotiation. He encouraged the farmers to withhold their taxes, a bold move that sent ripples of anxiety through the British administration. The Kheder agitation was not just about repealing taxes. It was about asserting the right to dignity and survival. The British eventually relented, suspending the tax for that year. Again, Gandhi's method worked, proving that even the most downtrodden communities could stand up to the might of the empire without spilling a drop of blood. It was a masterclass in activism, and Gandhi emerged as a leader who could translate lofty ideals into real-world victories. But let's not romanticize these triumphs too much. The victories at Champaran and Kheder were not merely the result of Gandhi's charisma or good intentions. They were rooted in the harsh economic realities faced by millions of Indians. The struggles highlighted the systemic oppression that left Indian farmers in dire straits, a reality as brutal as it was widespread. Gandhi's genius lay in his ability to channel these grievances into a movement that was both pragmatic and visionary. And then there was salt. Yes, salt. The British monopoly on salt was as absurd as it was oppressive, and it became a symbol of colonial exploitation. But hold on, the famous Salt March is a tale for another part of our story. For now, let's leave Gandhi at a pivotal juncture. His initial missteps and learning curve in India taught him that leading a nation was not just about donning a loincloth and preaching non-violence. It required a deep understanding of the socio-economic fabric, a strategic mind, and an unyielding commitment to justice. Gandhi's journey was far from over, and India's struggle for independence was only beginning its crescendo. As Gandhi would soon discover, the path to freedom was as winding and unpredictable as the Ganges itself. But one thing was certain. The man who returned to India in 1915 was no longer just a lawyer with a penchant for activism. He was a leader in the making, ready to take on an empire with nothing but the truth as his weapon. Stay tuned, because the real fireworks are yet to come. And so, just when Gandhi was catching his breath from the Kedah showdown, the British handed him a gift-wrapped opportunity for rebellion on a silver platter, or rather, a salty one. Enter the Salt March of 1930, a 240-mile amble from Sabarmati Ashram to the coastal village of Dandi. Now, if you think this was just a leisurely stroll to the seaside, think again. This was a masterstroke of civil disobedience, a strategic move that took the British Empire's absurd salt monopoly and turned it into a rallying cry for independence. Let's talk salt. We're not talking gourmet Himalayan pink salt here, folks. This was the basic stuff, essential for preserving food, flavoring meals, and staying alive in the sweltering Indian heat. The British had slapped a tax on salt that was about as popular as a heatwave in a wool suit. It was illegal to produce or sell salt without a license, and this affected every single Indian, rich or poor, like a universal thorn in the side. The salt tax raked in a staggering amount of revenue for the British, and it was a symbol of colonial exploitation as pungent as a fish market in July. Gandhi saw this salt tax not just as a fiscal nuisance, but as a golden opportunity to galvanize the nation. He chose to defy the salt laws in a way that was so simple yet so profound that it left the British scratching their heads. The Salt March was more than just a march. It was a statement, a 240-mile act of defiance that said, "We're tired of playing by your rules." On March 12, 1930, Gandhi set off from Sabarmati Ashram with 78 followers, a motley crew of supporters that would make even the most eclectic rock band look uniform. These weren't just any followers. They were people from all walks of life, students, farmers, women, and even a few British sympathizers who probably wondered if they'd left their senses along with their afternoon tea. Over the course of 24 days, the marchers trudged through villages and towns, attracting a snowballing crowd of tens of thousands, each step echoing a collective demand for freedom. But let's not romanticize this trek into a Bollywood musical number. The march was grueling, the heat relentless, and the British authorities were as cooperative as a cat with a bath. Yet with every mile, Gandhi and his followers gathered momentum, and the world watched with a mix of awe and bemusement. This wasn't just a march. It was a traveling seminar on non-violent resistance, with Gandhi as the charismatic professor who didn't need PowerPoint slides to make his point. The British, for their part, were caught in a bind. They could crack down on this sea of peaceful protesters, but that would only serve to highlight their own tyranny. So they did what any empire would do when faced with a PR nightmare of this magnitude. They dithered, hoping the problem would just melt away like a snow cone in the sun. Spoiler alert, it didn't. On April 6, 1930, Gandhi reached Dandi, and in a moment that was as symbolic as it was salty, he bent down, scooped up a handful of mud and salt, and declared the salt laws broken. It was an act as humble as it was revolutionary, a gesture that resonated across the subcontinent and beyond. Suddenly, salt was no longer just a seasoning. It was a symbol of resistance, an emblem of the struggle against colonial rule. Now here's where the myth and the reality start to diverge. The Salt March is often portrayed as a turning point that sent the British Empire reeling. And while it did generate massive international attention and support, it wasn't the immediate game-changer that some romanticized accounts suggest. The British didn't pack up and leave India the next day. Instead, tens of thousands of Indians were arrested, including Gandhi himself, who spent the next 9 months in prison. The British were clinging to their empire with a grip as tight as a miser's purse strings. The true power of the Salt March lay not in its immediate effects, but in the way it united people across India, from the bustling cities to the most remote villages. It showed the world that the British Empire, for all its might, could be challenged with nothing more than a handful of salt and a lot of courage. It inspired a new generation of activists and leaders who would go on to shape the future of the Indian independence movement. Among the quirky cast of characters drawn to Gandhi's cause was Sarojini Naidu, the Nightingale of India, whose eloquent speeches and fiery spirit added a poetic touch to the proceedings. Then there was C. Rajagopalachari, affectionately known as Rajaji, whose strategic brilliance and sharp intellect made him one of Gandhi's most trusted lieutenants. And let's not forget the countless unsung heroes, ordinary men and women who risked everything to join the march, proving that change often comes from the bottom up. In the end, the Salt March was not just about salt. It was about shaking the very foundations of colonial power. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest, most ordinary things can be the catalyst for extraordinary change. Gandhi's vision of non-violent resistance had taken a giant leap forward, and while the road to independence was still fraught with challenges, the Salt March had set the stage for the next act in this epic struggle. So, as the dust settled on the salty shores of Dandi, the British Empire found itself facing a movement that was gaining momentum faster than a monsoon storm. Gandhi had shown that the pen, or in this case, the pinch of salt, could indeed be mightier than the sword. And while the tale of India's fight for freedom was far from over, the Salt March had carved its place in history as a defining moment in the long march to independence. Stay tuned, because there's plenty more to this saga, and the journey is just getting started. And with the Salt March leaving its salty footprint on history, we find ourselves on the cusp of another pivotal chapter, the Quit India movement. Now, if you thought the British Empire was sweating over a pinch of salt, wait until you see the chaos that ensues when an entire nation decides it's time to evict its colonial landlords. This was 1942, and World War II was raging like a wildfire that simply refused to go out. The world was in turmoil, and India, unsurprisingly, was in no mood to play the obedient colony. The stage was set in August, a month as hot as the tempers flaring across the subcontinent. The British, under the leadership of Prime Minister Winston Churchill, a man who famously quipped, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears and sweat," were preoccupied with the Axis powers in Europe. But here in India, Gandhi decided it was the perfect time to turn up the heat with a little campaign called Quit India. On August 8, 1942, the All India Congress Committee convened in Bombay, and Gandhi, now a septuagenarian with more than a few political scars, delivered what would become one of his most famous speeches. The Quit India resolution, as dry as it might sound, was anything but mundane. This was Gandhi's clarion call for immediate independence, or in simpler terms, an ultimatum to the British. Leave India and leave it to God. Now, the British, predictably, were not amused. For them, this was like being asked to abandon their favourite armchair in the middle of a war. Within hours of the resolution being passed, the British authorities did what they did best, arrested the leaders of the Indian National Congress, including Gandhi himself. In a move as swift as a magician's sleight of hand, they whisked them away to unknown destinations, hoping to nip this rebellion in the bud. But here's the thing about movements like Quit India. They're like trying to contain a wildfire with a garden hose. The arrests only serve to fan the flames of defiance. Across India, protests erupted with a fervor that was as much about frustration as it was about freedom. Suddenly, the streets were filled with cries of "do or die," a slogan that captured the nation's collective resolve. The British, caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, responded with a heavy hand, martial law, mass detentions, and a liberal use of force. And this is where the myth and the reality start to tango once again. It's tempting to paint the Quit India movement as a seamless, coordinated uprising, but the truth was far messier. Without their leaders to guide them, the protests often descended into chaos. Railway lines were torn up, telegraph wires cut, and government buildings torched, a far cry from Gandhi's ideal of non-violent resistance. Yet this chaotic fervor was also a testament to the depths of Indian discontent. It showed that the desire for independence was no longer confined to the drawing rooms of political elites, but had seeped into every nook and cranny of Indian society. Economically, the British were feeling the pinch. The war effort was bleeding them dry, and India, with its vast resources and manpower, was crucial to their survival. The financial burden of maintaining colonial rule during a global conflict was as heavy as an elephant on a seesaw. But even with their coffers running low, the British clung to India with a tenacity that was equal parts stubbornness and desperation. And then there was Gandhi, the man at the center of this storm. Imprisoned in the Aga Khan Palace in Pune, he was cut off from the movement he had ignited. It's here that we see the harsh reality behind the non-violent facade. Gandhi's health was failing, and his personal losses began to mount. In 1944, while still in custody, he faced the devastating loss of his wife, Kasturba, who passed away in the confines of prison. It was a reminder that the cost of freedom was not just political, but deeply personal. Yet, even in isolation, Gandhi's influence was like an invisible hand guiding the movement. His growing popularity sometimes skirted dangerously close to a cult of personality. People revered him not just as a leader, but as a symbol of their collective struggle. This adulation was both a strength and a potential pitfall. While it unified the masses, it also risked elevating Gandhi to a pedestal that no mortal could realistically occupy. Meanwhile, the political chess game between the British and Indian leaders continued. The British offered the Cripps mission in 1942, a proposal that promised Dominion status after the war, a classic case of too little, too late. The offer was rejected faster than a bad date, as it failed to address the immediate demand for independence. The Quit India movement, despite its tumultuous nature, left an indelible mark on the British psyche. It was a wake-up call that the winds of change were blowing stronger than ever. The movement might not have achieved immediate independence, but it was a crucial step in the long journey toward freedom. It showed the world that India was no longer content to be a pawn on the colonial chessboard. The people were ready to be the masters of their own destiny, no matter the cost. And so, as the dust settled on the Quit India movement, the British found themselves grappling with a dilemma as old as time itself: when to hold on and when to let go. Gandhi, now a prisoner in both body and spirit, had set the stage for a new chapter in India's struggle for independence. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with twists and turns that no one could have predicted. But one thing was clear: the momentum was building, and the dream of an independent India was closer than ever. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. There are more battles to be fought, more myths to be busted, and more truths to be uncovered. The journey to independence is like a river, sometimes slow, sometimes swift, but always moving forward. And as Gandhi himself once said, the future depends on what we do in the present. So let's keep the momentum going, because there's plenty more to this epic saga, and the best is yet to come. And as the dust settled on the Quit India movement, the British found themselves grappling with a dilemma as old as time itself: when to hold on and when to let go. But while the British were busy contemplating their colonial grip, Gandhi was contemplating a future that was as unpredictable as the monsoon rains. The 1940s were a turbulent time, marked by the end of World War II and a world teetering on the brink of a new order. In India, the stage was set for a final act that would change the subcontinent forever. By 1947, the British were like a reluctant houseguest who had overstayed their welcome. Exhausted by the war and facing mounting pressure both at home and abroad, they decided it was time to pack their bags and head for the exits. But as they prepared to leave, they dropped a political bombshell that would have consequences as explosive as it was divisive: the partition of India. Let's get one thing straight: partition was less of a clean surgical incision and more of a hasty amputation performed with a rusty saw. The decision to split India into two separate nations, India and Pakistan, was driven by a toxic cocktail of religious tensions, political power plays, and a British administration that was about as organized as a toddler's playroom. Mountbatten, the last viceroy, decided to speed up the process like a chef trying to serve a 5-course meal in 5 minutes. Except this wasn't dinner. This was the future of millions of people. On August 15, 1947, India awoke to a new dawn and the bittersweet taste of freedom. But the birth of two nations came at a staggering human cost. The partition displaced over 14 million people, creating one of the largest refugee crises in history. The Radcliffe Line, named after the hapless British lawyer Cyril Radcliffe who drew it, sliced through communities like a knife through butter, heedless of the cultural and social ties it severed. The result: chaos, confusion, and a level of violence that turned the subcontinent into a cauldron of communal hatred. Estimates suggest that up to 1 million people lost their lives during this tumultuous time, a grim reminder that freedom often comes with a hefty price tag. And where was Gandhi in all of this? The Mahatma, who had spent a lifetime preaching unity and non-violence, watched his dream of a unified India crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. It was a bitter pill to swallow, and Gandhi, who had once been the face of India's struggle for independence, found himself sidelined by a new generation of leaders eager to chart their own course. He spent his final years in a desperate bid to stem the tide of communal violence, fasting and praying for peace in a nation tearing itself apart. But let's not put Gandhi on too high a pedestal. The myth of Gandhi as a saintly figure glosses over the complexities of his character and the contradictions in his beliefs. He was, after all, a man of his time. His views on race, gender, and caste were not as progressive as one might hope. He was a leader who wielded immense influence, yet often struggled to reconcile his ideals with the messy realities of political life. And then came January 30, 1948, a day that would be etched into the annals of history with the permanence of ink on parchment. In the calm of the evening, as Gandhi walked to a prayer meeting in New Delhi, he was assassinated by Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist who saw Gandhi not as a liberator, but as an appeaser of Muslims. 3 bullets ended the life of a man who had preached non-violence with the fervor of a missionary. It was a tragic irony that Gandhi, who had dedicated his life to peace, met his end through violence. The assassination sent shockwaves through India and the world. Here was a man who had become a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope for the oppressed, cut down in the prime of his influence. Yet, even in death, Gandhi's legacy endured. His philosophy of non-violence, or ahimsa, became a guiding light for future generations of activists. Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and countless others drew inspiration from Gandhi's methods, proving that the pen, or in Gandhi's case, the spinning wheel, could indeed be mightier than the sword. But let's not romanticize the aftermath. The partition left scars that are still visible today, a testament to the fact that the end of colonial rule was not a panacea for the subcontinent's woes. India and Pakistan have fought multiple wars since their inception, and the echoes of partition reverberate through the politics and society of both nations. Gandhi's vision of a united India, free from religious strife, remains an unfulfilled dream, a poignant reminder that the path to peace is often as elusive as it is essential. Gandhi's flaws were as much a part of his legacy as his achievements. He was a man who preached simplicity, yet his complex personality was anything but simple. He was a leader who inspired millions, yet sometimes struggled to connect with the very people he sought to unite. And while his methods were often unconventional, they left an indelible mark on the world, a testament to the power of peaceful protest in the face of oppression. In the end, Gandhi's life was a study in contradictions, a leader who wielded no weapons, a revolutionary who sought not to overthrow, but to transform. His legacy is a reminder that true change often comes not from the barrel of a gun, but from the courage to stand up for what is right, even when the odds are stacked against you. As we look back on Gandhi's life and the tumultuous events that defined it, we're reminded that history is not just a collection of dates and events, but a complex tapestry woven from the threads of human experience. And so, as we close this chapter on Gandhi's life, we find ourselves reflecting on the lessons he left behind. In a world that often seems as divided as it was in Gandhi's time, his message of non-violence and unity is as relevant as ever. His life was a testament to the idea that sometimes, being a thorn in the side of injustice is the best way to leave a mark. And while the world may never know another Gandhi, his legacy continues to inspire those who dare to dream of a better, more just world. As we bid farewell to this tale of one man's extraordinary journey, we are reminded that history is not just about the past, but about the future we wish to create. And in the words of Gandhi himself, be the change that you wish to see in the world. Because in the end, it's not just about the legacy we inherit, but the one we choose to leave behind. If you ever thought the road to becoming a Russian empress was paved with silk and gold, well, prepare to have that notion hit with a reality check the size of the Kremlin. Catherine the Great, born as Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, was the quintessential underdog in a royal saga that makes Game of Thrones look like a Sunday picnic. She started as a minor German princess, the type of title that gets you nods at European banquets, but not much else. Yet, by 1762, she was sitting on the Russian throne, sipping vodka and plotting reforms. How, you ask? Let's dive into the spicy details. First, let's get to know this ambitious young lady who was more than just a footnote in European noble circles. Born in Stettin, Prussia, which today is Szczecin, Poland, because borders were as fluid as a modern-day streaming service subscription, Catherine was baptized into the Lutheran faith. Her dad, Christian August, the Prince of Anhalt-Zerbst, was a military man, while her mom, Johanna Elizabeth, had aspirations that would make a Hollywood stage mom blush. Johanna aimed high for her daughter, eyeing the Russian court like a hawk at a field mouse convention. Fast forward to 1744, and Sophie, soon to be Catherine, was on her way to Russia to meet her betrothed, Peter III. Now, Peter was no Prince Charming. In fact, he was more like that distant cousin you dread sitting next to at family dinners. A lover of all things Prussian and decidedly unpopular, Peter had a penchant for toy soldiers and a severe disregard for Russian customs. The marriage was a political arrangement cooked up by Empress Elizabeth of Russia, Peter's aunt, who saw potential in young Sophie. Upon converting to the Russian Orthodox Church, Sophie took the name Catherine, and just like that, was thrown into the bare pit of Russian politics. Catherine's marriage to Peter was about as romantic as a tax audit. It said that Peter would play with his toy soldiers in bed, a hobby that arguably didn't scream husband material. Catherine was quick to realize she needed to play her cards wisely to survive, let alone thrive. While Peter was busy alienating Russian nobility with his admiration for Frederick the Great of Prussia, Catherine was busy making allies and reading philosophy. She immersed herself in the works of Voltaire and Montesquieu, understanding that knowledge was her best weapon in a court where ignorance could be as deadly as poison. When Empress Elizabeth died in 1762, Peter ascended to the throne, and Catherine became Empress consort. But Peter's reign was as shaky as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. His policies, like withdrawing from the 7 Years' War and making peace with Prussia, were less popular than a clown at a funeral. It didn't take long for Catherine to see her chance. With the support of the military and her lover, Grigory Orlov, Catherine orchestrated a coup. On June 28, 1762, Peter was arrested, and Catherine was declared the sole ruler of Russia. Peter conveniently died just a few days later under mysterious circumstances that could rival any modern conspiracy theory. Let's pause for a second to appreciate the grandeur of this power grab. It wasn't just a palace coup. It was a masterclass in political chess. Catherine had transformed from a minor princess to the most powerful woman in the world, all while dodging a husband who spent more time with toy soldiers than with state affairs. Her ascent to the throne wasn't just about seizing power. It was about outsmarting everyone in a game where the stakes were literally life and death. Now, Catherine had the reins of a sprawling empire that stretched over 8 million square miles, and she wasn't about to let them slip. Her early life and marriage had taught her the art of survival and the value of allies, lessons she would carry throughout her reign. As she settled into her role, she was about to shake up the Russian Empire like a snow globe, but that's a tale for another time. For now, let's raise a glass to Catherine's audacity, her strategic brilliance, and the sheer nerve it took to rewrite her destiny. Catherine the Great's reign was like a grand Russian ballet, but instead of pirouettes, she was executing political maneuvers that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. Now that she had the throne, Catherine knew she needed more than just a crown on her head. She needed to modernize a sprawling empire that was, let's be honest, a bit stuck in the past. Picture Russia in the 18th century, feudal, agrarian, and as rigid as a tax accountant's smile. Catherine set out to change that, and she had quite the ambitious to-do list. First on her agenda was the economy, which was about as robust as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. In 1765, she founded the Free Economic Society to encourage the modernization of agriculture and industry. This wasn't just a fancy name to put on a letterhead. It was Russia's first learned society, and its goal was to drag Russian agriculture kicking and screaming into the modern age. Picture a bunch of eager minds gathering to discuss crop rotation and soil fertility while sipping tea from delicate porcelain cups. The society even held essay contests with cash prizes. Think of it as a precursor to reality TV competitions, but with fewer sequins and more wheat. The Free Economic Society was revolutionary, but Catherine knew that ideas needed fertile ground to grow, pun absolutely intended. She introduced new crops like potatoes, which were about as popular as a soggy sandwich at first. Peasants were skeptical, often calling them devil's apples. But Catherine didn't let a little superstition stop her. She launched campaigns to promote them, even hosting lavish potato banquets. Imagine the shock on a noble's face when presented with a spud instead of caviar. Yet, Catherine was relentless, and eventually the humble potato became a staple, proving once again that persistence pays off, even in the face of culinary skepticism. But Catherine wasn't just about vegetables. She recognized the need for industrial growth too. Russia's industry at the time was akin to a toddler trying to run a marathon, enthusiastic but woefully underprepared. She initiated policies to stimulate mining and metallurgy, crucial for a nation with vast natural resources. Under her reign, the number of factories increased significantly. By the end of her rule, Russia had about 2,000 factories, up from a mere 984 at the start. That's more than a 100% increase. Talk about an industrial growth spurt. Despite her efforts, Catherine's image as an enlightened despot was a bit of a mixed bag. She corresponded with some of the brightest minds of the Enlightenment, including our dear friend Voltaire. Their letters were like intellectual ping-pong matches, with ideas bouncing back and forth at a rapid pace. Voltaire affectionately called her the Star of the North, but whether she truly embraced Enlightenment ideals is a different story. Sure, she spoke the philosophical lingo, but did she walk the walk, or was it all just a carefully curated image? Catherine's reforms seemed progressive, but they often had a catch. Take her approach to serfdom, for example. She expanded the bureaucracy and even considered drafting a new legal code. But when it came to freeing the serfs, she hesitated. The serfs, who were basically peasants bound to the land like barnacles to a ship, made up a whopping 90% of the population. Freeing them would have been like pulling the rug out from under the Russian economy. Instead, she extended serfdom into new territories, a move that was less enlightened and more let's not rock the boat. Her reluctance to end serfdom wasn't just about economic stability. It was also about keeping the nobility happy. Catherine needed their support to maintain her throne, and they were less likely to back an empress who threatened to upend their way of life. So she made concessions, granting them more control over their serfs in exchange for loyalty. It was a classic case of political pragmatism triumphing over philosophical idealism. Catherine's reign was a balancing act between progressive ideas and political realities. She was a leader who understood that you couldn't change an empire overnight, especially one as vast and complex as Russia. While she dreamed of transforming Russia into a beacon of Enlightenment thought, she was also keenly aware of the limitations imposed by the social and political landscape of the time. In the end, Catherine's domestic policies reflect a ruler who was both visionary and pragmatic, a woman who could charm the likes of Voltaire while playing political chess with her nobility. Her legacy is a tapestry of ambition and compromise, innovation and caution. As we move forward in this historical journey, we'll continue to unravel the complexities of her reign, exploring how she managed to steer a colossal empire through turbulent times, all while wearing a crown that weighed as heavily with responsibility as it did with jewels. As we pivot from the domestic ballet of Catherine's reign to her foreign policy, prepare yourself for a whirlwind tour of military might and territorial ambition. Picture Catherine, the Great, not just as a reformer, but as a grandmaster of geopolitical chess. Her expansionist strategies were like a Netflix drama with enough plot twists to keep historians binge-watching for centuries. Let's start with her most celebrated military feats, those against the Ottoman Empire. Now, if you think this was just a series of leisurely skirmishes, think again. The Russo-Turkish wars weren't mere border disputes. They were full-blown conflicts that reshaped the map of Eastern Europe. Between 1768 and 1774, Catherine's forces duked it out with the Ottomans in what became known as the Russo-Turkish War. And spoiler alert, Catherine's troops came out on top, thanks largely to the brilliant general Alexander Suvorov. This guy was Russia's rock-star commander, capable of turning the tide of battle with a strategy as sharp as a saber. But it wasn't just military genius that secured Catherine's victory. Let's talk numbers. By the Treaty of Kusuk-Kainaka in 1774, Russia snagged significant territories along the Black Sea coast, including the parts of Crimea. This treaty also gave Russia the right to protect Orthodox Christians in the Ottoman Empire, a clever political move that extended Catherine's influence beyond mere borders. Imagine a game of Risk where you not only capture territories, but also win the hearts and minds of the populace. That's some next-level empire building. Of course, capturing Crimea was a different kettle of fish. In 1783, Catherine formally annexed Crimea, a move that was about as subtle as a bear in a ballet class. This acquisition wasn't just a land grab. It was a strategic masterstroke that gave Russia a critical warm-water port. For a nation often choked by freezing temperatures, a port that didn't ice over was more precious than caviar. But like all good things, this came with a cost. Maintaining new territories wasn't cheap, and the annexation strained the empire's finances like a Black Friday shopping spree gone wild. Speaking of costs, let's talk rubles. Catherine's expansionist policies created a financial sinkhole that would make any accountant sweat bullets. The wars against the Ottomans weren't just bloody, they were expensive. Russia's military expenditure skyrocketed, and the empire found itself in debt, a situation that necessitated higher taxes and economic strain on its population. Picture a nation where the glitter of new territories was dimmed by the grim reality of economic pressure, a tale as old as time. Now, while Catherine was busy flexing her muscles in the south, she was also eyeing the west, particularly Poland. If you think Poland's partitions were as neat and tidy as a pie chart, you're in for a surprise. The first partition of Poland in 1772 was a diplomatic chess match involving Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Each nation took a bite out of Poland's territory like it was the last slice of pizza at a frat party. Catherine's involvement was significant. She nabbed 92,000 square miles of Polish land, expanding her empire while cleverly avoiding direct conflict. The partitions weren't just about land, they were about influence. By slicing up Poland, Catherine and her allies were effectively erasing a buffer state that had long been a thorn in their side. But let's not romanticize it. This was a brutal political maneuver that stripped Poland of its sovereignty and left its people caught in a geopolitical vice. It's the kind of power play that makes you question the human cost of empire building, where borders were redrawn with the stroke of a pen, yet the ink was often blood. While Catherine's expansionist policies were undeniably successful in terms of territorial gain, they were fraught with complexities. Her military campaigns and political strategies bolstered Russia's status as a European powerhouse, but they also sowed seeds of unrest, and financial burden. The annexation of Crimea, while strategically brilliant, embedded Russia in a region fraught with geopolitical tension, a legacy that echoes to this day. In dissecting Catherine's foreign exploits, we see the duality of her reign. A ruler whose ambitions knew no bounds, yet whose empire bore the weight of those dreams. Her expansionist policies were a testament to her vision of Russia as a dominant force, but they came at a steep price, both in rubles and in political capital. As we continue to peel back the layers of Catherine's legacy, remember, empire building is as much about the rubles you spend as the lands you claim. And in Catherine's case, the cost was as monumental as the gains. Stay tuned, because the saga of Catherine the Great is far from over. Now, as we've navigated through wars, political chess games, and the questionable acquisition of new lands, let's pivot to one of Catherine's most fascinating legacies: her love affair with culture and the arts. Yes, the Empress wasn't just about expanding borders and power plays. She fancied herself quite the cultural connoisseur, too. Her reign wasn't just a chapter in Russia's history. It was an entire volume of the world's art anthology. Enter the Hermitage Museum, established in 1764. Now, if you're picturing a cozy little gallery where Catherine politely sipped tea while admiring dainty portraits, think again. This was no quaint art salon. It was a colossal collection that screamed, "I'm here, and I have taste." The Hermitage began when Catherine acquired a whopping 225 paintings from a Berlin merchant. We're talking masterpieces by the likes of Rembrandt and Rubens, not just some weekend watercolor hobbyist's work. And that was just the beginning. By the time of her death, the Hermitage housed around 4,000 paintings. That's enough to make even the Louvre break a sweat. But let's not kid ourselves. Was this massive collection a testament to Catherine's genuine appreciation of the arts, or was it more of an imperial shopping spree with a side of cultural one-upmanship? After all, nothing says, "I'm a sophisticated ruler," like having the world's masterpieces hanging in your living room. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Catherine was a woman of her time, and in the 18th century, flaunting art was akin to flaunting power. The more art you had, the more cultured and enlightened you appeared, and Catherine wanted Russia to be seen as a cultural heavyweight. Her patronage didn't stop at paintings. Catherine had a voracious appetite for Enlightenment ideals, even if, at times, she treated them more like a buffet than a strict diet. She corresponded with the intellectual heavyweights of her era, Voltaire, Diderot, and D'Alembert, to name a few. These were the intellectual rock stars of the Enlightenment, and their ideas were the philosophical headliners of the day. Catherine's letters to them were filled with flattery and philosophical musings, a sort of 18th century intellectual fan mail. Yet here's where the irony kicks in. While Catherine was busy discussing human rights and liberty with Voltaire, she was also tightening her grip on her own empire with the deftness of a seasoned autocrat. It's like she was shopping for Enlightenment ideals in the same way some of us browse online shopping carts, picking what suited her fancy and leaving the rest. The irony was palpable, and it didn't go unnoticed. Enlightenment thinkers often found themselves perplexed by Catherine's two-faced approach, championing liberty while maintaining serfdom. Speaking of serfdom, let's not forget that while Catherine was penning sweet nothings about freedom and reason, the serfs were still very much bound to the land. A whopping 90% of the population, remember. The lofty ideals of liberty and equality were as applicable to them as a snow shovel in the Sahara. But Catherine was a pragmatist at heart. She knew that freeing the serfs would destabilize the very fabric of Russian society, not to mention ruffle more noble feathers than she could afford. So she kept the status quo, all while sending letters to philosophers about the virtues of a free society. Now, back to the art. Catherine didn't just hoard paintings, she nurtured a vibrant cultural scene in Russia. She invited architects, musicians, and playwrights to her court, turning St. Petersburg into a glittering epicenter of creativity. She was like a cultural DJ, spinning the best of European art and music for her Russian audience. Under her reign, the Russian ballet began to flourish, and the theater saw a renaissance of sorts. It was like she had taken the cultural volume knob and cranked it all the way up to 11. But was this cultural boom a genuine passion or a strategic move to bolster Russia's image? Perhaps it was both. Catherine was astute enough to realize that cultural prowess was as important as military might and territorial expansion. In the eyes of Europe, art was the currency of sophistication, and Catherine was a savvy spender. Her court became a beacon of Enlightenment culture, drawing artists and intellectuals like moths to a particularly well-lit flame. That said, let's not gloss over the economic side of this grand cultural endeavor. Art isn't cheap, and neither was Catherine's taste. Importing artworks, commissioning operas, and building palatial structures came with a hefty price tag. The imperial treasury was already groaning under the weight of military expenditures. And here was Catherine, adding the financial equivalent of a diamond necklace to the empire's ever-growing credit card bill. But in Catherine's eyes, these expenses were investments in Russia's cultural capital, a legacy that would outlast her reign. So, was Catherine the Great a true patron of the arts, or a monarch with a penchant for cultural grandeur? The answer is as complex as the woman herself. Her reign was a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, intellect, and power, each strand telling a story of a ruler who understood the potency of image and the allure of culture. In her quest to transform Russia, she left behind a legacy that continues to captivate and confound historians today. As we draw our gaze away from the dazzling art and culture of Catherine's court, we're left to ponder the dual nature of her legacy. She was an autocrat with a philosopher's pen, a ruler who could charm the intellectual elite while ruling with an iron fist. Her story isn't just one of power and politics. It's a saga of a woman who dared to dream grandly, even if those dreams sometimes came at the cost of reality. But hold on to your Ashankas, folks, because Catherine's story doesn't end here. There's more to uncover, more to unravel in the complex tapestry of her reign. We've explored her artful ambitions, but we still have to delve deeper into the contradictions and complexities that defined her rule. So stay tuned, because the story of Catherine the Great is far from over. As we step into the twilight of Catherine's reign, let's peel back the layers of her final years and confront the myths that cling to her legacy like stubborn barnacles. It's a tale filled with political chess, familial drama, and the kind of gossip that would have made tabloids back then salivate. Catherine the Great, the Empress who brought Russia onto the world stage, was also a woman who knew the value of a good story, especially if it involved a scandal. So let's talk about succession, a topic as touchy as a Russian winter. Catherine had big plans for her grandson, Alexander, bypassing her own son, Paul I, who she thought was, let's say, not quite up to snuff. Paul was the royal equivalent of the second-string quarterback. He was there, but you really didn't want him leading the team. Catherine thought he lacked the political finesse needed to steer the Russian ship. But in a twist that would make Shakespeare grin, Catherine never got to put her succession plan into action. She died in 1796 at the age of 67, leaving Paul to inherit the throne. Paul's reign, if we can call it that, was a whirlwind of undoing. Imagine inheriting a meticulously curated art gallery only to replace the masterpieces with velvet Elvis paintings. Paul reversed many of Catherine's policies, from embracing militaristic rigidity to revoking some of her liberal decrees. His reign was short and, frankly, a bit chaotic. He lasted just 5 years before being assassinated in 1801. His death, orchestrated by disgruntled nobles, was as much a political statement as it was a family drama. It's almost as if the Russian court couldn't decide whether it was a political arena or a soap opera. But let's not get too caught up in the melodrama without a nod to legacy. Catherine's achievements were significant. She expanded Russia's borders, brought Enlightenment culture to its court, and reformed its administration. Yet she remains as famous for her personal life as her political accomplishments. Ah yes, the myths. Juicy, scandalous, and mostly unfounded. You've probably heard the one about the horse, a salacious whisper that galloped through history without a shred of evidence. This tale of equestrian misadventure is a classic example of how a powerful woman's legacy can be overshadowed by gossip that would make even today's clickbait blush. Catherine's love life was indeed colourful, with a roster of lovers that makes for a fascinating read. Among them was Grigory Potemkin, her political partner, and perhaps the closest she came to a soulmate. Together, they were a power couple that could give modern celebrities a run for their money. Potemkin was instrumental in her military campaigns and domestic policies, proving that Catherine's affairs of the heart often intertwined with affairs of state. Yet, despite these personal liaisons, Catherine's true passion lay in statecraft. Her reign oversaw the transformation of Russia from a feudal backwater to a major European power. She championed education, founding the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens, the first state-funded higher education institution for women in Russia. This was a progressive move that showed her commitment to enlightened ideals, even if the reality was that most Russian women were still far removed from such opportunities. So, how do Catherine's real achievements stack up against her legendary status? It's a mixed bag, to be sure. On one hand, she's celebrated as a savvy ruler who expanded Russia's influence and modernized its institutions. On the other, her legacy is clouded by myths and scandals, the kind that stick like glue in public memory. But perhaps that's the nature of history. It's as much about the stories we tell as the facts we record. Would Catherine be more famous today for her statecraft or her scandalous reputation? It's a question that hangs in the air like the mist over the Russian steppes. In an era where celebrity often trumps substance, Catherine's life offers a reminder that history is rarely black and white. Her reign was a kaleidoscope of ambition, intellect, and yes, a fair bit of drama too. In the end, Catherine the Great was a woman who dared to dream big and live boldly, crafting a legacy that continues to intrigue, inspire, and occasionally scandalize. As we close the book on her story, let's remember Catherine for what she truly was, a monarch who understood the power of narrative, both in her policies and in the stories that outlived her. Her legacy is a testament to the complexities of power, gender, and history, a saga worthy of the grand Russian epics. And perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, that's the best way to remember her, not just as a ruler or a scandal, but as a legend who knew how to play the game of history like no other.